Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining me today. I am so sorry about the delay. We've got a new setup tonight. So hopefully we don't have some of the technical difficulties that we've had in the past. You get to see more of a wider view of me. You get to see more of the cords and wall behind me, more of the pillows I'm sitting on, leaning on. Great stuff, folks. Welcome. We're going to have a great conversation here tonight. Let's just jump right into it.
Of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just it's a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Hey, everybody. How you doing? Welcome. Be sure to hit the like button. Be sure to hit the subscribe button. Be sure to hit the notifications bell. Always good to hit the notifications bell. That way you know when we're going to do another one of these. Always a good thing to do. And the way this works, for those who you may not be familiar with it, I give my opening remarks. Sometimes that's an epic speech. Other times it's just me kind of shooting the breeze and talking about world events. Right now I'm pouring the unnamed water beverage, right? Just poured it, heavy jug, but that's okay. And, sometimes the opening remarks are just me shooting the breeze. Other times it's me giving an epic speech tonight. It'll be a little bit of both, probably more towards the just shooting the breeze. I'll give my opening remarks. After I give my opening remarks, at that point, when the opening remarks are over, I'll give my roll call, or I'll call you all out as I see you, names and locations. And then after that, once that is over, at that point, we will do answering super chat questions for the rest of the evening. That's how it's going to work. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell, and we'll just jump right into things. We're just going to jump right into things. So as you will probably have heard all over U.S. media, Elon Musk has purchased Twitter. Elon Musk has purchased Twitter. And we're all supposed to be hugely outraged by this. How dare one man purchase a social media outlet? How dare one man have such power? This is an attack on democracy. This is a threat to freedom of information. This is all just so horrible. We're supposed to be outraged by it. And let me be clear. We're not supporters of Elon Musk. Elon Musk is a billionaire capitalist monopolist who has, taken a lot of stances that we would vehemently disagree with. He opposes public transportation, which I think we need a lot more public transportation. But he's gone out of his way to say that anyone who advocates public transportation is an idiot. He is certainly not where we're at on these streams. We are not Elon Musk fans. We are not Elon Musk simps. But it is certainly amusing watching the American political establishment have a meltdown over Elon Musk taking ownership of Twitter. Now, I hope that Elon Musk will take ownership of Twitter and make it better. There's no guarantee he'll do that. But the reason that these claims on the part of our leaders and the part of our main voices in mainstream media are so ridiculous. Well, actually, before we get to that, I'm just going to show you a clip by one of these people, a liberal on MSNBC, who is outraged about Elon Musk's ownership of Twitter.
Twitter or Facebook or what have you. You don't have to explain yourself. You don't even have to be transparent. You could secretly ban one party's candidate or all of its candidates, all of its nominees, or you could just secretly turn down the reach of their stuff and turn up the reach of something else, and the rest of us might not even find out about it till after the election. Elon Musk says this is all to help people because he is just a free speech, philosophically clear, open-minded helper.
So did you hear that? They're admitting that the owners of Twitter, I mean, you just heard it from the mouth of the people that that are on mainstream media. They admit. What did he say? What did he say that the owners of Twitter are able to do? What are they able to do? He said,
all of Twitter or Facebook or what have you, you don't have to explain yourself. You don't even have to be transparent. You could secretly ban one party's candidate.
wow. Can you think of a prominent politician from one party who's probably going to be running again in 2024 who's banned from Twitter? Gee, I can't think of any. Geez, I no names come to mind there. Thank goodness. Thank goodness. Yeah. Oh, wow.
Or all of its candidates, all of its nominees, or you could just secretly turn down the reach of their stuff and
oh, wow. Turn down the reach of their stuff. Does that sound like what they do with their algorithms already?
turn up the reach of something else, and
Turn up the reach of something else.
the rest of us might not even find out about it till after the election.
And the rest of us might not find out about it until after the election.
Elon Musk says this is all to help people because he is just a free speech, philosophically clear, open-minded helper.
Now, folks, the whole reason this rant that we just heard from that Democrat is so ridiculous is because what he's describing is what Facebook and Twitter and YouTube already do. They already do this right in front of our eyes. They suppress views that they don't agree with. They promote views that they do agree with. They have banned Donald Trump, a major figure in the Republican Party. They've banned him from social media. They've pegged my account on Twitter as Russian state-affiliated media just because of where I work, even though it's a personal account. It is not. My personal Twitter account is not controlled by Russia. It has nothing to do with any company in Russia. It's my personal Twitter account. They have pegged my personal Twitter account as Russian state-affiliated media. And based on that, they admit they're suppressing my tweets, right? If you look at their definition of state-affiliated media, if they tag you as state-affiliated media, they suppress your tweets. It doesn't show up in people's feeds. So he's basically upset that Twitter might do under the leadership of Elon Musk what Twitter is already doing. So why are they outraged that Twitter might do what Twitter's already doing? Because Elon Musk, to some degree or other, has Bonapartist aspirations, and he's not part of the club. Now, he's not a socialist. He's not a revolutionary. He's not really an anti-imperialist. He supported the coup in Bolivia, horrendous position. So he's not a good guy, but he's not in their club, and he favors one faction in the ruling class against others. So there's a feeling that he shouldn't be able to do what Twitter is at this point already doing. I mean, this is really, really something special. Really something special. I mean, it's really just classic hypocrisy. But that said, is there any guarantee that Elon Musk will do a better job with Twitter? No. I mean, he's bought it. I still have the Russian state-affiliated media tag on my name. The tweets of people that I agree with tend to be still suppressed. So there's no guarantee of anything getting better. So we're not cheering for Elon Musk, but we have to point out that this is ridiculous. And one of the things that I will point out that, again, is an argument in Elon Musk's favor. Let's see if he actually does it. If he did this, that would be awesome. If he did this, it would be really awesome. I ate some chocolate before here, and it's on my hands. That's disgusting. But one thing that Elon Musk has spoken about is he has talked about how he's actually at this point, he's thinking about opening up the algorithm. He's thinking about opening up the algorithm, and he would make the algorithm of Twitter transparent, which is very interesting. He would make the algorithm of Twitter transparent so you could actually see what posts they're promoting, what posts they're suppressing. and he would make it available to the public. You could see the code to Twitter. Do you know how many people are trying to figure out the code to Twitter all the time? It's like, and Facebook and YouTube. There are whole companies devoted to just trying to crack the code, right? And just trying to figure out what can go viral. How do you say the right words? There's a lot of money in this, just a lot of money in this. A lot of people who spend their time with search engine prioritization and all of this. And he wants to make it public on the internet to know what they're suppressing and what they're promoting. Now, if he does that, that's huge. That's huge if he does that. That is very, very big. That's a game changer, right? You would see what stances Twitter is taking. You'd see who they're suppressing. You'd see who they're promoting. That's a big deal. That's a really big deal. And so if Elon Musk does that, my hat will go off to him. I'll say, good sir, I do not agree with you about a lot of things, but that's a step in the right move. But we'll just have to see what happens to Twitter. I'm on Twitter. I'm tweeting. They haven't banned my account yet. But we shall see. We shall see how things develop. I am a bit skeptical. I'm not a huge Elon Musk fan. Not a huge Elon Musk fan, but this could be a step in the right direction. This could be something else. We shall see. But the fact that the Democratic Party is reacting to Elon Musk buying Twitter as if it's a crime against humanity is so utterly ridiculous. It is utterly ridiculous that they are reacting that way, because all the stuff that they claim Elon Musk might do with Twitter is already being done by the billionaires who own it. And they're very open about it. They're suppressing anti-imperialist views. They're promoting pro-imperialist views. They banned one major figure in the Republican Party. They're already using social media to meddle. And I don't know if folks saw, but there was recently a call. There's been a call for quite some time to break up the social media giants because they're monopolies. They are monopolies under U.S. antitrust legislation. So there's been calls to break them up under antitrust law. And we have the U.S. intelligence community, the people that run the FBI, the CIA, and all of them, writing an open letter to Congress and saying, no, don't break them up, because that'll make it harder for us to use them to fight against Russia and fight against China. I mean, they're blatantly saying that at this point, right? They're blatantly saying, no, maintain these artificial monopolies so we can use them more effectively to wage public and global information warfare. So we already know that Twitter and Facebook and YouTube are basically functioning as a wing of the U.S. government, the U.S. State Department. They're carrying out U.S. foreign policy goals. And this is not a new thing, right? I mean, in my book on Kamala Harris, I talk about an episode that took place right after Barack Obama got elected. 2009, and this was reported, my source is the New Yorker magazine. Again, not a radical anti-imperialist source by any means. The New Yorker magazine wrote an article towards the end of Obama's presidency about Hillary Clinton and the Hillary Clinton State Department and their fight that they had with the Obama White House. And in 2009, go back to 2009, Barack Obama was elected president in 2009. Barack Obama was elected. He took office. He won the 2008 election. He took office 2009. Hillary Clinton is appointed Secretary of State. And in Iran, they had just had an election. And Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, a very strong anti-imperialist, who said that capitalism is the main enemy, who was a big ally of the Palestinian people, who fought for the rights of workers in Iran, kind of, almost the Iranian version of Hugo Chavez, right? I mean, he's very much an anti-imperialist. He loves Fidel Castro. I think he said things like Fidel Castro was the greatest Muslim in the Western world or something like that, even though Fidel Castro is not a Muslim, making a statement that Fidel Castro's actions are in line with the Islamic teaching, that he's standing up to capitalism and greed. Ahmadinejad was for Iran. He was about as socialist as you can get in Iranian politics. Right. I mean, that's what Ahmadinejad is. In Iran, you can't be a socialist. You have to agree with the Islamic constitution. No Marxist or socialist parties allowed. There's something like the Islamic Labor Party or whatever. But Ahmadinejad, who's going around giving speeches against capitalism, he's, establishing relations with Venezuela and Cuba, and he's denouncing capitalism in all his speeches. Ahmadinejad's about as socialist as you can get in the Iranian Islamic political system, right? So Ahmadinejad is reelected in Iran. And so all the rich kids of Tehran, and there's a lot of them, you know, if you go to the northern Tehran, which I've been to, some of these wealthy neighborhoods where they have these restaurants with golden arches on them that look almost like, you're very welcome, Joshua. Any more super chats, I'll write them down. They have these restaurants that with golden arches that almost look just like McDonald's. And, the northern Tehran neighborhood have a lot of wealthy capitalists who hate the Islamic Revolution, who want to be Americans, right? So when Ahmadinejad won the election in 2009, you had what was called the Green Movement. The Green Movement in Iran. And these rich kids, they just went out and rioted. They went out and rioted against the government. And some of them were wanting the Shah of Iran to come back to power. There's a lot of video of these rich kids, and they're chanting, Reza Shah, Reza Shah. They're calling for the family, in Sunset Park, the rich royal family of Iran to come back to power, right? I mean, and they're waving the flag that has the lion and the sword. It's like the symbol of the Shah or whatever. So, it was a right-wing, upsurge in response to Ahmadinejad winning the elections. They had this protest movement against the Iranian government. So Hillary Clinton, at the time, she's Secretary of State, she went to somebody who was working at the U.S. State Department named Jared Andrew Cohen. Not Jared Cohen of the Trump administration. That's a different guy. Jared Andrew Cohen. Different fellow. Former member of the board of Google Alphabet. Big Silicon Valley guy, Jared Andrew Cohen. And Jared Andrew Cohen went to Google and told them to manipulate the algorithms to support the protests in Iran. He said, manipulate the algorithms to promote these protests in Iran. Now, are we shocked by this? No, but it's documented. This is a fact, okay? That the Hillary Clinton State Department sent Jared Andrew Cohen to go to the owners of Google and say, and Twitter, and say, can you please manipulate the algorithm in order to support the protests against the Iranian government and against the election where Ahmadinejad got reelected? So they did. And Barack Obama found out about this and was very upset. Why? Well, Barack Obama was upset because he was focused on trying to eventually set the stage to negotiate the Iran nuclear deal. And so he's saying, I'm getting ready to negotiate the Iran nuclear deal. And then Hillary Clinton, on the other hand, is doing the opposite. She's trying to undermine Barack Obama. And she goes and she sends her guy to stoke up the algorithms at Twitter and promote unrest and chaos in the streets of Iran. So that happens. Barack Obama finds out about it. And he says, this guy's fired. He's fired. You can't go to Twitter on behalf of the U.S. government and tell them to meddle in Iranian politics without talking to me first. I'm the president. So he said, Jared Andrew Cohen's fired. Hillary Clinton called up Barack Obama. We don't know what she said, but Barack Obama had to unfire Jared Andrew Cohen. Now, that happened in 2009. China deals with imperialism. That happened in 2009. In 2009, we know for a fact that there was a fight between the Hillary Clinton State Department and their tech Silicon Valley guy, Jared Andrew Cohen, and the Obama presidency, the Obama White House. And it was related to foreign policy. So, and the manipulation of foreign policy. And that's really important to talk about because it shows that they have been doing this a long time. 2009 was not recent history. That was before Trump was elected. That was in the very beginning of the Obama administration. That was a long time ago. And if they've been doing that, if back in 2009, they were already tweaking the algorithms to manipulate things to destabilize Iran, imagine what they're doing then. Now, a couple of years later, you had the Arab Spring. People will remember the Arab Spring and the role that social media played in that. Al Jazeera, Twitter, and Facebook, the fake videos about Gaddafi, the claims that somehow Gaddafi was handing out Viagra so his soldiers could rape women that turned out to be complete bullshit. All these lies. you know, that all this regime change propaganda against Syria and against Libya was just pumped through the algorithms during the Arab Spring. Meanwhile, the revolution in Bahrain that happened was completely blacked out. There was a revolution in Bahrain during the Arab Spring, and it was completely blocked out. You know, Bahrain is it's a tiny country that's right next to Saudi Arabia, and it has a Shia Muslim majority, and they have a king who rules over them, who's a puppet of the United States and a puppet of Saudi Arabia. And the majority of the population are Shia Muslims. The king who's appointed is a Sunni and a Wahhabi. And during the Arab Spring, you know, the people of Bahrain went out in the streets and they toppled the king, and the king had to flee the country. Now, when the Egyptian president fled the country, all over CNN. When Gaddafi and that situation got going, all over CNN. But you know, Tunisia, that was all over CNN. And thank you for the super chat. It was all over CNN. But when the people of Bahrain overthrew the government and toppled the king, and then Saudi Arabia got its army together and invaded Bahrain and reimposed the dictator, the autocratic king, on Bahrain, there was nothing in American media. It was like it didn't happen. There was a CNN crew that filmed the whole thing, and they wouldn't allow it to be aired. CNN wouldn't air it. They completely blacked it out. They completely blacked out the Bahrain revolution. It's like it never happened, right? You know, there was a revolution, the king was toppled, and then there's a foreign army that invades and puts the king back on the throne. All of this is happening, and CNN is like, nothing to see here. Not important, not important, not important, not important, not important. That shows you, and Facebook and Twitter, all of them, the Bahraini revolution would never have happened. And when the king came back into power in Bahrain, he started cutting people's heads off. He started beheading Shia Muslim clerics and murdering people. You never would have heard any of this. Unbelievable. Unbelievable, right? So during the Arab Spring, Hillary Clinton's State Department, all of them were manipulating social media, manipulating mainstream media like crazy. They were definitely doing that. So it's worth noting all of this, right? You know, the way they did all of this. So, I mean, this is something I've researched. So now this new acquiring of Twitter by Elon Musk, who's beaten the drums ahead of time, that he's a free speech kind of guy. He's going to make it a free speech platform. He's going to make the algorithm public, which is big. It's going to put a lot of people out of business. I'll tell you that. There's a lot of Silicon Valley nerds who are going to lose their jobs, because if they make that algorithm public, there's a whole lot of Silicon Valley nerds who work for, you know, marketing companies who do nothing but sit around and try to figure out the algorithms all day. Seriously. I mean, that's a lot of these marketing firms, since so much advertising is on social media now. There's whole companies that do nothing but try to figure out all day long how to rig the algorithms and what's working, what gets promoted, what doesn't. That's all they do. So there's going to be, if they just make the algorithm public and it's just right there on the internet, that's big. Now, my question is, will they make the whole algorithm public, or will they just make some of it public? And that'll be a nasty trick if they do that. They say, oh, here's the algorithm. Anyone can look at it. And then behind the scenes, there's the algorithm, and there's the other algorithm that we don't tell people about. That would be particularly nasty if they did that. And I wouldn't put it past them to do that, right? So we're not huge fans of Elon Musk here. Elon Musk is bad in many, many ways, okay? But I'm just telling you that this is weird. And again, right? Elon Musk is not a socialist. Elon Musk is not a revolutionary. But if you look at that clip I just showed you, the fact that they're reacting to him like this, they're calling him a dictator, and they're saying, oh my God, one man cannot have this much power. The mass line. The fact they're saying that shows you there are divisions in the ruling class. And that is a really big point that we talk about on these streams. We talk about divisions in the ruling class and who's behind them and the financial interests. We interpret the events and we understand who the different factions in the ruling class are and how we can maneuver within them. Hopefully, we can get to the point that the working class can maneuver within them in order to gain victories and eventually have socialism. Lenin talks about this, but how you have to pay attention to the factions in the ruling class. And if you just sit there and go, they're all capitalists, they're all bad, that's like kindergarten communism. I've said that before, right? There's some pretty basic stuff that you can call kindergarten communism, right? We don't need elections. We need socialism. Capitalism bad, socialism good. This is a socialist country. This is a capitalist country. You know, this is a worker. This is a capitalist. This is a petty bourgeois. You know, there's like kindergarten communism. That's like the basics. But if you want to be a serious revolutionary, you have to get beyond just the basics, right? You got to get beyond the basics. And we love Chris Smalls, by the way. He is awesome. We are huge fans of Chris Smalls here. You got to get beyond the basics. You got to think strategically. You know, think about how the Bolsheviks maneuvered and aligned with the factions in the Russian ruling class that wanted to topple the Tsar, and then aligned with the factions in the Russian ruling class that wanted to topple, that wanted to end World War I, and how they built Soviets and built up their own power while making strategic alliances and staging strikes against the war. This is how serious revolutionaries operate. You got to think about how Fidel Castro, right, saw that Batista was a really hated leader. And he didn't announce that he was a communist, but he wrote in saying he was going to restore democracy and topple the dictator Batista, and how he wrote in and it wasn't clear that he was going to be a communist. And so the United States even gave him some financial backing for a while, hoping that he would not become a communist. And so Fidel Castro maneuvered and he kind of united. He built a united front, a popular front against Batista, against the Batista dictatorship, and then maneuvered that popular front to overthrow Batista, but then brought the working class forward. These are serious tactics. This is how serious revolutionaries operate. They don't just go around pointing at people and saying, you're a capitalist, you're a worker, we don't need voting, we need a revolution. It's like, we get it, right? That's kindergarten communism. You know, this is an apple, this is an apple tree, you know, this is the letter A, this is the number 2. Like, that's pretty basic. That's kindergarten communism. But if you're seriously thinking strategically about how to maneuver the working class to take power, you have to think beyond kindergarten communism, right? And you have to understand imperialism. You have to understand divisions in the ruling class. And you have to understand Bonapartism. Karl Marx, you know, in 1851, the French government was overthrown. Karl Marx was living in Paris, and there were strikes going on all over Paris, and the workers were rising up and protesting. And then the French government was overthrown by the military, and the conservatives and the Party of Order were booted out of the country and had to flee. And the Society of December 10th took power. This mass organization made up of criminals, basically, and desperately poor people, took power along with the military and became government. And Karl Marx, he could have, if Karl Marx were a kindergarten communist, he would have written a pamphlet called, you know, about it, and he would have said, Louis Bonaparte is not a communist. This is not communism. The end. But he didn't do that. Instead, Karl Marx wrote a book that's not very long. It's almost, I don't think it's a full 100 pages. It's a short pamphlet. But in that pamphlet, 1851, Louis Bonaparte, the 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte. Right? Third way. Very good question. The 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte, Karl Marx analyzes the different social forces that are aligned with Bonaparte, with Louis Bonaparte, who declared himself the military dictator. And he shows that it was the banker capitalists, the financiers, who asserted power and took control of the government against the factory owners. The factory owners, the industrial capitalists, took power. They were crushing the strikes. And that in order to stop a revolution in France, in order to stop all the social chaos, they needed to have a 12-hour workday. And they needed to let workers form unions. And they needed to build hospitals for poor people. So the bankers got behind Louis Bonaparte. And they said, all right, the only way we can get the industrial capitalists to do this is we got to force it on them. So Louis Bonaparte got the army together, and then he built an army of desperately poor, hungry criminals, the lumpen proletariat, and hippies, intellectuals and literati. And the army and the hippies and the criminals got together, and they marched on Paris, and they seized control of the government, the 18th Brumaire, the coup of 1851. And they overthrew the government, and they established a military dictatorship. And Louis Bonaparte became the military dictator. And when Louis Bonaparte was the military dictator, he kicked the ass of the industrial capitalists, and he forced them to recognize unions, and he forced them to enact a 12-hour workday, and he built hospitals for poor people, and he also built railroads, and he did, some progressive city building kind of stuff, but he also lined up a bunch of communists against the wall and shot them. I mean, he executed a lot of communists too. He was a Bonapartist. It was the financiers, the bankers, building up an army of foot soldiers, the lumpen proletariat, and the military, and seizing control of the state in an attempt to stabilize capitalism. Now, in Louis Bonaparte's case, you could argue that it was kind of like Roosevelt. It was progressive Bonapartism. I mean, not completely, right? He did execute a lot of communists. That's not good, obviously. Roosevelt wasn't completely good either. He wouldn't challenge Jim Crow segregation. He hung out with the segregationists. He put Earl Browder in jail after the 1939 pact. That was pretty awful. Put the leader of the Communist Party in jail. Bonapartists, they go both ways, but it's when there's a section of the ruling class that is in opposition to the other sections of the ruling class, they seize control of the government. And Louis Bonaparte in 1851, he was like what you might call a progressive Bonapartist, because the reforms he enacted were good for society. They raised the productive forces. He built those railroads. He, enforced a 12-hour workday. He built those hospitals for poor people, right? And it was an attempt to stabilize French capitalism. Ultimately, it didn't work. It didn't work because, it worked for about 10, 15 years. But then pretty soon, France was in a crisis, an economic crisis again. And pretty soon, the Prussians were fighting the French, and the Prussians were invading, and the government fell. And then in 1871, 20 years later, you had the Paris Commune, where the workers of Paris rose up and seized control of the country. So Bonapartism doesn't work. It's a temporary fix. It's an attempt to use heavy-handed state power to stabilize capitalism. And it doesn't work, ultimately. And, you have Louis Bonaparte, who's kind of a progressive Bonapartist. You have Roosevelt, who's a pretty progressive Bonapartist. I mean, Roosevelt went as far as actually aligning with communists. Louis Bonaparte never did that. But then you have reactionary Bonapartism. You have Hitler, for example. Hitler, overthrew the Weimar Republic, established a military, an authoritarian fascist state. You have Mussolini. These guys are Bonapartists also. But what do? What makes them fascist, right? Because not all Bonapartists are fascists. You can have Bonapartists that are not fascist, right? But what was fascist about what Hitler and Mussolini did is that they drove living standards down. As soon as Hitler took power, there was chaos in the streets. He made, kind of like what the Ukrainian Nazis have done now. He made the SS or the SA, the stormtroopers, an official wing of the government. So this group of street fighting racist thugs that went around murdering Jews on the street, suddenly they had official uniforms and badges, and they were allowed to do their shit like as official police. So they went around terrorizing people, and there was chaos in the streets. But then Hitler realized that he wasn't going to be in power too much longer if things didn't calm down. So he had the Night of the Long Knives, where he rounded up all the leaders of the stormtroopers, his own street fighting group, the very people who had brought him to power. And he killed them all, right? And among them was Ernst Rem. The head of the stormtroopers was a guy named Ernst Rem, who was a homosexual, was gay. They found him in bed with another man, and so they charged him with sodomy, even though everyone knew the guy was gay. They locked him in a room with a gun, and he shot himself. That's the official version of events. They probably just shot him, but they said, he committed suicide after being arrested. But, that's Ernst Rem. And it's so bizarre because Ernst Rem is just a vile, evil guy. I mean, he's just evil. But Ernst Rem, you read about Ernst Rem, Hitler's street fighting guy. Ernst Rem was just a vile guy, but he was gay. And because he was gay, there's all these odd, like, ID poll books trying to make him out to somehow be good. It's the weirdest thing. I mean, the guy was a raving anti-Semite. He wrote an autobiography, the autobiography of Ernst Rem. And all it is just page after page of brutal violence of him bragging about all the communists he killed. It's just disgusting. But, it's just like there's nothing good about this guy ever. I mean, he was gay and a vicious anti-Semite and a vicious mass murderer and a vicious fascist, but he was gay. And so there's all these academics that like try to look back and say, well, this is a guy who didn't want to be as vicious. No, like this guy Hitler killed him because he wouldn't calm the fuck down. That's why Hitler killed him. But anyway, Night of the Long Knives happens. Hitler killed all of the leaders of his group. And then he replaced them with like a special group called the SS, which was like his own like secret police force. And then they set up a network of concentration camps, and they started giving companies subsidies by having prison, concentration camp labor given to them for free. And they also built these autobahns, these highways across Germany that served military purposes. It was so if they ever had a two-front war again, it was like they were generals fighting the last war. They thought in World War I, we had to fight on this side of the country, we had to fight on that side of the country. We're going to build these highways so that if we ever have a war, we can move people back and forth. They built these highways, and they started rebuilding their military very rapidly. And so that burst the economy, right? I mean, if you have those, and they stopped paying back their loans, that was the other thing. So again, those are, if you start hiring people to build highways, you start hiring people to build concentration camps, you start giving corporations a bunch of free slave labor. And on top of that, you start military spending up again, you can get the going for 5 or 6 years. But by 1939, they were in a crisis of overproduction once again. And you still had they had to have World War I because, again, it doesn't work. It's a temporary fix. So, but that was reactionary Bonapartism, because the essence of what Hitler was doing was he was trying to stabilize capitalism by creating an underclass, by reducing the population. He started exterminating disabled people. They started going around to people that were political dissidents. They started going around to people that were disabled or mentally ill and sterilizing them so they couldn't have children. And the idea was they were going to reduce the population. They were going to create like a permanent layer of slave laborers and use their slave labor to stimulate the economy. And by reducing living standards and reducing the population and breeding people like animals, right? They were really into that eugenics. They were going to stabilize the economy, and it didn't work, right? I mean, it ultimately didn't work. And, and we know what happened eventually with the Holocaust. So that's reactionary Bonapartism. But again, if you had been in Germany in 1933 when Hitler took power, and you'd have just said, well, Hitler's a capitalist and the Weimar Republic are also capitalists, and you would be missing the point, because there was clearly a very big division in the ruling class. I mean, sections of the ruling class were lining up other sections of the ruling class and shooting them. And again, that's kindergarten communism. If you sit there, if Karl Marx in 1851 had just sat there and gone, oh, there's Louis Bonaparte, he's a capitalist, there's the party board, they're capitalists, they're all capitalists and we need a revolution, that would have been kindergarten communism. You have to be able to analyze these divisions within the ruling class and strategically assert the interests of the proletariat, right? You have to do that, right? And it's necessary as a materialist not to look at what they're saying. And this is, Ron McKinnon here is saying, factions in the ruling class can be the basis of shoddy analysis. But what Ron McKinnon is missing is the reason, and you'll get this argument from your Joe Sims and your Sam Webbs and, your social democrats, but what they are missing, fundamentally, what they are missing. Can I make this go away? Why is, my God, this StreamYard, make it. Oh, there we go. All right. What they're missing is that you can't look at what the rules say. You have to look at what they want and what they do. What is their economic incentive? Because especially in a time like this, any faction of the ruling class is going to say what will get them power. And the people who look at divisions in the ruling class in this very shallow way, it always leads, for them, it leads to vote for the Democrats because they talk nicer. Vote for the Democrats because they talk nicer. Ask them which financial interests are behind the Democrats. They can't tell you. Ask them which financial interests are behind Trump. They can't tell you. Ask them why the Democrats are better, and they'll say, because they said, and they'll list a bunch of things they said. Say, what have they done? What have they actually done to improve the conditions? Right? And that's what's missing, right? And the people that want to talk about divisions in the ruling class, and it's like we're always on the brink of fascism. It's always about to have fascism, so that means you have to vote for the Democrats. They're missing the point. They are completely and entirely missing the point, which is that as a materialist, as a Marxist, you're not looking at what they say. That's this whole bread tube thing about the fascist aesthetic. Fascism is uniforms. Fascism is strength. Bullshit. Fascism is what you do. Hitler was a fascist not because of what he said, it was what he did. Arpam Dutt in his very, very important book Makes it very, very clear. Oh boy. It's not one thing, it's another thing, right? Makes it very, very clear. Hold up. Hold up. All right, very good. It makes it very clear that fascism is not about what you say. The kind of things that Hitler said were not unique. They had been said by anti-Semites for hundreds of years in Germany. They had been said by nationalists in Germany for hundreds of years. They'd been said by conservatives and fake socialist demagogues for years. What made Hitler unique was what he did, not what he said. And Arm Palmed Up makes this abundantly clear. The same with Mussolini. Nothing unique about what Mussolini said. His ideas were a mishmash of Plato and futurism and nationalistic conservatism, etc. But what Mussolini did, seizing control of the government, that is what makes fascism unique. Fascism is not an aesthetic. Fascism is a practice. It is a mobilization and the seizure of state power by one faction of the ruling class and mobilizing the population to drive down living standards, to reduce the population, to reduce living standards. Degrowth. Fascism is degrowth. If you want to know the essence of fascism, it's degrowth. And often it's done in the name of racism, right? They say we're going to exterminate this race of people. Often it's done, in the name of anti-Semitism or conspiracy theories or all kinds of crap. It's not about what they say, it's about what they do, right? If Hitler had said all the same crap, but got elected democratically and never did anything about it, he wouldn't be a fascist. The reason Hitler's a fascist is because he took power, established an authoritarian Bonapartist state, and used state power to drive down living standards, to build a network of concentration camps and set the stage for World War II. That's what made Hitler a fascist. And if you look at Wokism, the wokes, in many, many ways, are more fascistic in what they do, not what they say, what they do, than the conservatives are. What do conservatives think right now? Everyone they don't like is a communist. Well, conservatives have always thought that. I mean, going back to 100 years, that's all the conservatives. They're a bunch of commies. Global warming's not real. It's a bunch of commies trying to take my profits away. Rah, rah, rah. I don't want to pay a minimum wage at my factory. That's communism. I can pay whatever wage I want. It's nothing new about that. So, the right wing, they think everyone's a communist. The right wing are racist. When have the right wing in the United States not been racist, right? I mean, my God. I mean, the right wing in the United States has been racist for 100 years. They've been racist. What are they advocating? They want free market reforms, neoliberalism, privatizations. Shocker, right? Shocker. Conservatives have wanted that, again, for 100 years. Nothing unique there. But what is it that the wokes are doing? The wokes are actively going around and saying we need to drive down living standards. They are actively going around and saying the problem is average working class Americans. The problem is working people in the United States have too much stuff. And they are mobilizing a group of people who go out and break shit and tear things down in order to make society poorer. Furthermore, the wokes openly want the government to silence dissident voices. They say if you disagree with them, judge politicians by what they do, not what they say. They say if you disagree with them, you deserve to be beaten up and killed. The conservatives aren't saying that. They might think it, and they've thought it, for a long time, and they might even say it sometimes. They're not doing it. But I mean, look what these people have done to me. I look at. I get very nervous. I really can't go into left-wing spaces anymore. And I agree with these people. I'm a communist, for Christ's sakes. But because I disagree with the woke left, my own safety is in jeopardy. I mean, these people, I get threats and all of that. I mean, these people, and they go out and they beat people up. And, if you disagree with them, if they labeled you on the internet as transphobic or homophobic, if someone murders you, that's fine. That's nuts. That's insane, right? That's insane. So they want an authoritarian state. They want to drive down living standards. They want to drive down the population. And they're openly supporting fascist groups in Ukraine that are murdering Roma people on the basis of their ethnicity. They want traitors, basically. Anyone who doesn't go along with their war with Russia, they label you a traitor to the homeland, and they want you put in jail, right? They want RT outlawed. I mean, I'm not hearing any of this from conservatives. Now, the wokes aren't full-born fascists, but there's a lot more of a whiff of fascism coming from the wokes than there are from conservatives right now. Conservatives right now are just pathetic, right? They're backward ideas. They want to privatize everything, libertarianism, anti-immigrant bigotry, hatred for Islam. It's the same kind of conservative crap. There's elements of the neocons, and there's also elements of the old right, Ron Paul, etc. But these people, again, they're just kind of like, please don't take my Facebook down. Why shouldn't we fight China instead of Russia? And then they all vote for fighting Russia anyway. I mean, conservatives at this point, they're the controlled opposition, right? That's basically what we're down to. Wokism is the party line, and conservatism is at this point the controlled opposition. If you're against the status quo in the United States, which if you're a communist, you should be. That should be basic, right? If you're a communist, you're against the status quo. Like, whatever happened to that? Did people just forget that? This should be kindergarten communism. What the ruling class is doing, we're against it. We're against it. And overthrowing the ruling class, that's what we're for. That's pretty basic. Seems like some people have forgotten that. But the ruling party line is that America is no longer the America of George Washington. America is no longer the America of Jim Crow segregation. Now, America is a happy, woke, culturally sensitive, multi-diverse society. And it's so woke and amazing and so free that not only is America the best country in the world because it's so free, but it now has the right to go and attack Russia because they're not as woke and multicultural and free as America. And they have the right to attack China because they're not as woke and free and multicultural as America. And that America is about human rights and liberty and feminism. And if you criticize it, you must be a Nazi. That's the ruling party line. Did Khrushchev. Transition to a state of the whole people. Writing it down. That's the party line. Whereas the conservatives, their line is basically, no, we need the America of the 1950s back. We need the America of Jim Crow back. And these wokes are all a bunch of commies, and they're a bunch of communists, and they don't need to read the Bible or something. I mean, it's controlled opposition. It's there. And I think the opposition, the form the opposition takes is going to change because a lot of these conservatives are just old people. They're just old people who, the woke makeover came and they never got on the train, right? The train showed up. They said, we're taking America into this new woke place to justify war. And they're like, I ain't getting on that train. There's a bunch of gay people on there. I ain't getting on no train. There's a bunch of immigrants on there. I'm not getting on no train. No. I'm not getting on that train. There's a bunch of immigrants and Muslims there. I'm staying here. That's who conservatives are. They're grumpy old people. They're bitter. And their bitterness is they don't know this. A lot of them don't know it. It's based on years and years of economic depression. I mean, they can remember, these old folks can remember the 1950s when the USA had a booming economy. I mean, we don't know how good it was, right? I mean, that's one of the scariest things. And, get an old person talking, ask them how good the economy used to be. And you'll be shocked at what you hear. People would go to college for less than $100. People would go to college for less than $100. If you lost your job, you walked across the street to the construction site and you had a new job the same day. Right. I mean, it was, now there was always a layer of low income folks. The black people never had an equal share of that prosperity. There may have been better conditions, and employment levels and such during the 1950s. They were still the first fired, the last hired. And in Appalachia, there was still huge amounts of poverty, and the Chicano people, and there was a lot more open, blatant discrimination and such. But in terms of the economy, it was better, right? I'm also against Jim Crow, dude. So what kind of music do you listen to? Okay, Stefan. What kind of music do you listen to? Thanks, Stefan. I appreciate it. And, the economy used to be much better, in the 1950s, the 1960s, when that post-World War II economic boom was going on, the economy used to be a lot better. It used to be a lot easier to find a job in the United States. It used to be a lot easier to see a doctor when you're sick. It used to be a lot easier, right? And these old people can remember that. And that's part of why they're reluctant to get on the woke train, is they're like, no, I can remember how good it used to be. And it sucks. And why should we keep going into this woke place when, I've watched Michigan, my home state, or Pennsylvania, or Arizona, or Texas become deindustrialized. Now, in their minds, they don't see that as neoliberalism and privatizations and the gutting of the economy. They don't see that. They see it as things used to be good. And then starting in the 60s, we got, culturally more woke. And then especially since the Obama administration, we got more woke, and they don't like wokeness because they've been watching conditions in their neighborhoods and communities go downhill ever since. And a lot of that is just, conservatism for a lot of these folks. They're just old, and the woke train showed up and they're like, I ain't getting on this damn train. I ain't getting on it. Look at my neighborhood. Look at my community. Things are far worse than they were when I was a kid. I ain't getting on your damn train. There's a bunch of immigrants on there, a bunch of queers, a bunch of gay people on that train. I ain't getting on there. And that's what they're about. Those people are not going to be around forever. Life expectancy might be longer than it is, but, those folks, eventually they won't be with us anymore. When they're not with us, there's still going to be opposition to the status quo, right? There's still going to be opposition. And that's why the Republican Party is very excited about things like the Proud Boys, because they're young. That's why they're very excited about things like QAnon, because it tends to be a younger crew of people that are into QAnon. It's not like 20-year-olds that are into QAnon. It tends to be like 30 and 40-year-olds, but that's the demographic who get into QAnon. But, that's your Rust Belt voter. That's who your typical conservative was. And they just saw the woke train coming, and they ain't getting on it. And that's what American conservatism is. And, conservatism is the controlled opposition, and it's a refusal to get on the woke train. Wokism is the new Bonapartism maneuver that has a whiff of fascism in it. Wokism is not full-on fascism. It has elements of it, but it's not full-on fascism. Proud Boys. Again, there's an element of fascism there. This is a street fighting group. This is a group of people that, they're loyal to Western civilization. You can smell fascism there. Not full-on fascism, but there's elements of it, right? And that's generally the period we're living in. Is there is an increasing amount of Bonapartism fighting among the ruling class, has Trump permanently altered the Republican Party? Okay, has Trump permanently altered the Republican Party? Good question. And that's what's going on. Is there are fights in the ruling class? Now, I want to just briefly kind of go over what makes the Center for Political Innovation, what makes our analysis unique. What is it that makes our analysis unique? Why are we different, I guess, than your typical leftist Marxist? What makes us different is that we hold on to the central principle of Marxism. One of the most important aspects of Marxism. If you don't understand this, you're missing the whole thing. Historical progress. History is marching forward. Human beings, 5, 6, 7,000 years ago, were hunter-gatherers in the woods. But then we got too good. Wow. I'm so sorry, Troy. So sorry to hear about your loss. My heart goes out to you. Condolences. But then we got too good at hunting and gathering. We developed sticks and rocks, and there was a scarcity. And so we developed agriculture. We had the first social revolution out of hunter-gatherer tribal civilization, emerged slavery, the slave societies. And out of the slave societies, eventually that got outmoded. You got feudalism. And out of feudalism, eventually you got capitalism. And now capitalism is becoming outmoded. And socialism is emerging around the world in places like China, Vietnam, Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua. Socialism is emerging to replace capitalism. And socialism is about moving to a higher stage and raising and increasing the productive forces, raising the amount of wealth in society, raising human beings to better conditions. And eventually the goal is a society with so much abundance, so much wealth, that all inequality can break down, that people can just work because they feel like working. If you read Critique of the Goethe Program, right, from Karl Marx, he talks about a society where labor becomes life's prime want, no longer a necessity. That's ultimately the goal. City University was free until 1976. My grandfather went to CUNY, Brooklyn College, one summer in the 50s, and it was free. Wow, that's wild, Peter. I'm writing it down. It used to be free. And that's the goal. Historical progress, raising the level of productive forces. And the whole critique of capitalism is that capitalism is a system where abundance creates poverty. You have poverty amid plenty. You've never had that in systems of the past. Systems of the past, there was definitely poverty. People were definitely hungry and starving, but they were hungry and starving because there was a food shortage. Systems of the past, people were homeless. There was definitely housing shortages, but people were homeless because there wasn't enough housing. Only under capitalism can you have the situation where people are hungry because there's too much food, or people are homeless because there's too much housing. That's the capitalist system. Poverty created by abundance. Because under capitalism, your only value as a worker is renting yourself out to a boss, selling your labor power to a boss. And the more efficient the means of production become, the fewer workers that the capitalists hire, the less people there are to buy their products, and you have frequent crises and gluts of overproduction. The capitalist system is highly inefficient, right? And we talk about the problems of capitalism. Right? Under capitalism, you have the general law of capitalist accumulation, where a capitalist corporation has to constantly keep expanding. If it doesn't expand, it starts to collapse. And so it keeps expanding until you have a monopoly. And then when there's a monopoly, you have what's called monopolistic stagnation, because at that point, they have a monopoly. So there's no incentive for them to do anything, right? They're going to make profits anyway. So under capitalism, we have to create all these artificial mechanisms for the government to step in and break apart monopolies so that we can continue to have the economy functioning according to the general law of capitalist accumulation, right? Again, these libertarians say there'd be no monopolies if it weren't for the government. No, the market naturally leads to monopolies. They have natural monopolies. This is what generally happens. Corporations compete with each other. One starts to do better, one goes under, and eventually you have a monopoly. Trotsky on the Chinese Revolution. What was his disagreement? That's how these things work. And that's generally how these things work. And you have the problem of overproduction. The capitalist is constantly driving to produce as many goods and maximize his profits, produce as many goods as possible, but pay as little as he possibly can. You have the tendency of the falling rate of profit as you reduce the role of the worker in the assembly line. The worker is where you get your surplus value, your profits from. Machines don't create surplus value, only human labor does. So the rate of profit the capitalist can make from every product goes down, the tendency of the falling rate of profit. The capitalist system has a built-in self-destructive mechanism. It can't function. And socialism is not dividing up everything equally so that it's all completely fair. That's not what socialism is. That's what I learned it was in school too. Socialism is everyone gets the same wage no matter how hard they work. I remember my teacher said, if I gave every kid in this class a C, that would be socialism. And those of you that are failing, that would be good for you. But those of you that are getting an A, that would be bad for you. Well, that has nothing to do with it. No socialist country in the history of the world has ever had equality of wages. That's bullshit. That's just something made up. They just lie to you in school. Socialism is when the banks and the factories and the industries and the centers of economic power are forced to work in a rational way. The rule of profits and the anarchy of production is abolished, and the banks, factories, and industries and the centers of economic power function according to a rational central plan. Frederick Engels talked about production upon a predetermined plan. Marx talked about, the instruments of production being centralized in the hands of the state. Go read the Communist Manifesto. Centralized in the hands of the state, and then raising up the productive forces. It's about overcoming the irrationality of the market, overcoming it, and enabling growth to continue in a sustainable way. It's not about reducing consumption. It's about enabling consumption and growth to continue to expand, but in a way where the irrationality and the chaos and the anarchy of the market is abolished. So the means of production function rationally with a state central plan so that growth just continues. And that's why if you look at China, since the communists have come to power, it's almost a straight line up. They just keep rising and rising and rising. Why? Profits aren't in command. There are a lot of market mechanisms in China, but they don't have the power. The Communist Party, with their 5-year plans, with their state-run industries, they have the power. And they can come in and tell private corporations what to do. And a lot of the private corporations don't really function according to the market. They're basically subsidized so much by the government and directed by the military and by the government that you just have growth, right? That's why the Soviet Union raised millions of people out of poverty and turned an industrial, pre-industrial, agrarian, impoverished society into the first society to conquer outer space. And it electrified the whole country and wiped out illiteracy. That's why Cubans live so much better than people in Jamaica or Guatemala or Haiti, right? That's why under Gaddafi and in Libya, the life expectancy was the highest on the African continent. This is the strength of socialism, is it enables economic growth to continue beyond the irrationality of the market. It puts human reason and rational planning in control of the economy by abolishing the anarchy of production. That's why socialism is better than capitalism. And the idea is that socialism will lead to a higher amount of growth and that eventually you will get rid of capitalism. That's the idea. That's what Marxism is all about. Now, I don't know what these other people, they think that it's all about, but that's what it's about. It's not about worker cooperatives. It's not about redistributing everything so everything's fair. I don't like this phrase, abolish billionaires. It's not that I like billionaires. I don't like billionaires. The billionaires of our society exist by exploiting the workers. But the reason the phrase abolish billionaires is not correct is because the problem is not wealth. The problem is capitalism. The problem with the billionaires is not that they have billions of dollars. It's that they got billions of dollars by exploiting the workers. So they got billions of dollars making society poorer with the anarchy of production. Back in the Middle Ages, one of the most valued items you could have was a mirror. Did you know this? Back in the Middle Ages, to have a mirror, if you could have a mirror, if you could look at yourself, look at your own face, that meant you were the 1%. You were a king, you were a queen, you were a wealthy noble. Very few people had mirrors. People wanted to see their reflection. They had to go to a lake and look at themselves in the lake. Now, if you were around in the Middle Ages and you were fighting for the working people, the peasantry, right? The craftsmen, the working people, the people who produced the wealth. You were fighting for the 99%, the broad masses of people against the 1%, the ultra rich who had mirrors. Would it have been right for you to go around saying, abolish mirrors? We don't want anyone to have mirrors. Would it have been right for you to go around and every time you saw a mirror, smash it? No mirrors. We want to get rid of mirrors. No, that would have been stupid. The goal should have been to overturn feudalism and create a society where everyone could have a mirror to get to a higher stage. Right? The goal is not to make everybody poorer. The goal is not to abolish mirrors, and it's not to abolish billionaires. It's to abolish a society where one small group of people has access to that kind of wealth at the expense of everyone else. It's about abolishing an unjust relationship and replacing it with a much more rational and just relationship in which wealth can expand for all society. That's what socialism is about. It's not about abolishing mirrors. It's not about abolishing billionaires. It's about abolishing exploitation. It's about abolishing the rule of profits and the irrationality of the market. And I don't understand why this is so hard for people to get. You know, every time I mention this on Twitter, people lose their minds. They all lose their mind. You're defending Jeff. No, I'm not. No, I'm not. No, I'm not. I'm sticking up for dialectical and historical materialism. And this guy who tweeted me, who's a libertarian, I don't know who he is, but look, in a lot of ways, I hated libertarians. I still, like, on some level, I get mad at their free market rhetoric. But I see how insane the synthetic left is. Libertarians believe in economic growth. They do. The synthetic left thinks economic growth is bad. They think every time there's economic growth, it's bad. We got to get back to nature, man. Well, libertarians, they believe in economic growth. Now, they think capitalism is going to create it. Well, I think the last 200 years has shown all over the world how, capitalism, free market reforms, neoliberalism does not create growth. The British Empire went all over the world imposing free market reforms, creating famines, creating poverty. And it was the rise of socialism. I mean, the greatest, economic expansion in human history was the post-World War II economic expansion. And that was when you had the rise of communism around the world. You had social democracy in Western Europe. You had authoritarian Bonapartist regimes in South Korea and Iran and stuff. And it was, the economic growth does not happen with libertarian free market reforms. They tried after the fall of the Soviet Union. They imposed shock therapy, neoliberal reforms on Eastern Europe, and it wrecked the place. And Putin fixed it by putting oil and gas under public ownership. And they tried neoliberal free market reforms in Latin America in the 90s. Thank you, Lily. Shout out to Lily, by the way. Lily's awesome. She was on a great call today representing, the Alex Saab Freedom Group, engaging with the Alex Saab folks. So we're going to see video of that later, not on this stream, but later it'll come out. So great work, Lily. Shout out to you. And the same in Latin America. They imposed neoliberal reforms in Bolivia. They privatized the oil and they privatized even the water, and it wrecked the place. Neoliberal economic reforms do not work, but libertarians believe in them because they believe in economic growth. And the libertarians, they go around believing in economic growth. And the people who represent socialism, the synthetic left, their argument against capitalism is they don't believe in growth. And it's insane to me because Marxism is all about growth. In fact, the idea is to create so much growth that we can break down all inequality. That's the idea. So there you go. Now, I wanted, I'm all about encouraging people to debate and argue with people. And Destiny Stephen Bennell is one of the biggest idiots I've ever debated, right? Debating him was very, very easy. Yeah, that's really funny, Troy. That's a very good point, right? A lot of these people advocating degrowth wouldn't like to live it. You were right about that. You're right about that. And people who actually live in poverty don't think poverty is beautiful, right? Mother Teresa, she said, poverty is beautiful. Oh, it's just so beautiful. No, it's not beautiful. Poverty is not beautiful. Low life expectancies for children, not beautiful. Children dying because they drink water that's not properly purified, not beautiful, right? Malnutrition that causes people to be mentally retarded for the rest of their lives because they didn't get proper nourishment is not fucking beautiful. And it drives me crazy to hear these people. They think, oh, it's so these beautiful people. No, it's not beautiful. It's not beautiful. Go back to the 1800s where, families would have 10 children because they expected 5 of them to die. I mean, good night. But, poverty is not beautiful. But anyway, I've debated this guy, Destiny Stephen Bennell. He wanted a rematch with me, but I said no. So I just want to review. Here's another great clip from my debate with Destiny Stephen Bennell. You can watch the whole thing. It's got like hundreds of thousands of views on the internet. But you can watch. This is my debate with Destiny Stephen Bennell. This is another clip from my debate. So I just want to show it. We'll stop. I'll show you some of the dishonest techniques he's using. We'll go over the points. So here's another clip, and then we'll end the opening remarks.
People don't blame Haiti for capitalism, but they do blame Venezuela, right? My understanding of Haiti is there are a lot of corruption problems that exist within that government. It's not literally just they tried capitalism and it's ruining the country. But then people do blame Venezuela. Well, that was because Venezuela,
Yeah, that's totally what I said. When I pointed to Haiti as an example of capitalism, I totally said that all of their problems are simply they tried I mean, it's like straw man after straw man.
Very specifically started to make socialist pivots in its economy. It started to nationalize more industries. It started to wait. Which part of that do you disagree? Do you disagree that they were expropriating industries? Do you disagree that they tried to hardcore set price control?
Ownership in Venezuela is actually much lower than the rate of state ownership in China. Other than
wait. How is that a?
Yeah, actually, yeah. There's very little state ownership in Venezuela. The government controls the money through oil revenue, but there's not state-run industries in Venezuela. There's not state-run steel industries. I mean, there's like power plants that are run by the government. The government subsidizes worker cooperatives, but there's actually quite a low rate of state ownership in China or in Venezuela. The rate of state ownership in China is much higher. Just interesting FYI that you would never know from the synthetic left.
No, you wouldn't compare the state.
Oil, very little is nationalized, and I've been to Venezuela, and one of the biggest problems they have is that their economy is entirely centered around oil. And when the oil price dropped in 2014,
and that's true, by the way. When I was in Venezuela, when I met with communists, when I met with leftists, that was their big complaint. They said that we should have used the oil revenue to build up our own state-run industries.
That caused a huge amount of scarcity. They need to have, farms there. They need to have steel manufacturing there, and they don't have it. If they had state-run big steel mills and state-run farms and all of that, they'd be in a much better shape.
Okay. If you want to at a future debate, I would love to come back and talk about Venezuela, because I am positive that your assertions there, that it was just because oil collapsed, that's why that country fell apart, is absolutely not true. And that no person that has been involved.
Is a big problem as well.
No, not corruption, that it was very specifically. Okay, it was very specifically pivots towards trying to socialize or nationalize or expropriate parts of their economy to set incredibly restrictive price controls that caused capital industry to flee that country, that caused some firms to no longer produce goods there or provide goods for its people. This is one of the large reasons why Venezuela fell. It's not just because oil prices fell a little bit. You don't see other OPEC countries.
An oil-producing country, a huge oil-producing country, bigger oil reserves than Saudi Arabia, than I've heard. The oil prices drop, and at the same time, they suddenly start having big economic problems, but it's unrelated. It's all just because they believe in socialism too much. That's what you're saying? Oil price drop of 2014 was dramatic. At that point, you could buy a family meal at Kentucky Fried Chicken that would cost more than a barrel of oil.
The petroleum sector accounts for roughly, sure. So I'm just looking this up. Sure. I'm literally I'm looking this up on the fly because I know you're very incorrect. The petroleum sector accounts for roughly 87% of Saudi's budget reserves, 90% of the export earnings, and 42% of GDP. That's petroleum in Saudi Arabia. And Venezuela, oil is.
Saudi Arabia had big economic problems as well.
Saudi Arabia didn't have pictures of families eating rats off the street because their economy tanked so hard. I don't have people.
You're not allowed to.
From Saudi Arabia,
crying that they're in the country that are guest workers, slaves. Saudi Arabia, you couldn't take a picture like that.
Yeah, there's people starving on the streets of Saudi Arabia all the time. 1 in 3 people in Saudi Arabia is a literal slave, a guest worker slave. And he's like, well, I didn't see any pictures of rats or anything. It's like, give me a break.
And Saudi Arabia has had big economic problems during that time.
Sure. Okay. So
look,
I'm very curious. I'm just curious.
Nigeria had problems. Oil-producing countries all suffered as a result.
Sure.
Of 2014
they did suffer.
Go ahead and let Destiny. Go ahead and get your point in.
The fact that Venezuela didn't.
Are you going to make the claim that Venezuela suffered just as much as every other OPEC country did when oil prices fell? Is that the claim that you want to make?
No.
So why did
Venezuela also suffers from sanctions from the United States? Venezuela also has big problems with corruption, and they also have the problem that they don't have. You said that the problem was they already had steel manufacturing. They already had big farms. No, the problem is they don't have it. It's a one commodity economy.
Why is that relevant? Why does that matter? You don't need to produce every good that your society consumes.
If your entire economy is centered around oil, right, and you are importing all of your food and products, and then you get sanctions imposed on you, and yes, there are big problems there, and they've manifested themselves, and I think it's interesting, though. Now, you acknowledge, what I think is interesting about your Venezuela narrative is the narrative I normally get from people about Venezuela is that everyone has been poor and starving ever since they had socialism there, and that proves communism always fails. That's not the narrative that you have. You've admitted that there were economic successes there until a certain point. Now, why does the media lie? Why can't they admit what you just said? Why
I don't know. I'm not here to talk as a Fox News correspondent. I'm just curious why you think central planning is effective.
MSNBC or CNN. None of them can admit
MSNBC or CNN
with their socialist economy until roughly about 2014.
Why am I getting let's not
obscures, extensively obscures. Why are you saying this and none of them are saying this?
I don't think Destiny wants to I don't think Destiny wants to speak for media companies.
Yeah, I'm not here to
well,
Fox.
I appreciate your honesty, because
sure.
everyone tells me all the time everyone's been starving ever since they moved towards socialism in Venezuela. You admit that the problems began fairly recently. Thank you.
Thank you
for your honesty. So we can agree anti-communists are liars. We can agree on that. That the anti-communist narrative that's promoted throughout U.S. society is based on deception and falsehood. Thank you for admitting that. I appreciate it.
I don't know if that...
Wow. See that cringe on his face? See that cringe? He basically admitted that everything you hear about socialism on CNN, everything you hear about socialism on Fox News, the whole narrative around Venezuela is a big lie. That's what he admitted right there. He just admitted that. They just admitted that. He just admitted that. And the thing is, if he hadn't been debating me, if he'd been debating somebody who wasn't as well informed as I am, he would have repeated that narrative as well. He would have said that Venezuela's been poor and starving ever since they had socialism. But he investigated me and he looked at my work and he knew I would be able to debunk that. So he came up with a more sophisticated narrative about Venezuela, right? If it had been anyone other than me, he would have just said, oh, they're poor and starving because of socialism. You could be sure of that. That's how these people argue. That's how these slime balls argue.
Destiny can
so I haven't
make
admitted
that claim.
anything.
Why is it necessary to lie, Destiny? Why don't they say what you just said? Why don't they say
Destiny can't speak for media companies. Destiny, go ahead and respond.
Because most of the people that were alive in the United States probably either have parents or grandparents that were involved in some crazy dumbass U.S. war against communism and the idea that like all commies are trying to destroy the world and blah 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 blah, and like that is
the narrative that he's pandering to. That's basically who he's pandering to with this communism doesn't work stuff. It's all bullshit. And he just basically, I got him, an anti-communist, to admit that 95% of what Americans believe about communism is bullshit.
Lie, and it's stupid. It's incredibly stupid. The way that Americans view, if you ask the average American what is socialism, the answer they would probably give you is stealing money from the rich and giving it to the poor.
Wow. That was something special, right? I basically forced Destiny to admit that the narrative the US media gives around Venezuela is based on lies. And on top of that, I debunked his trying to blame the problems on socialism. He knows nothing about the sanctions. He knows nothing about the oil. He knows nothing about it. So that was pretty special. I just wanted to show you all that clip. That was fun. That was a lot of fun. I might show you all another clip from that later. We'll see how the Q&A goes, the super chat questions. But right now, I guess we'll do our roll call. Names and locations, folks. Names and locations. I will call you out as I see you. Who's with us tonight? Names and locations. Who is with us? Who is with us? Names and locations. Who's with us? All right. Just going to start calling off names. We'll do our roll call. That'll be fun. And then, so I'm just waiting for names. JT24 in Mississippi. Sarantos in Seattle. Sarantos is in Seattle. Zaire from Ronders, Denmark. Dario from Brooklyn. David Fox in Bendigo, Australia. Robert from Hawaii. Elias from Wisconsin. Alan in Chicago, Australia. Kim from North Korea. Carmen from Reading, Pennsylvania. Not pronounced Reading, it's Reading. Calgary from Canada. Mo and Danielle from Pomona, California. Quinn and Meredith from Eatonville, Washington. DLJ from Malaysia. Lily in Boston. Soon Atlanta once more. Cosby fan, really. Bergen County, New Jersey. Christian, great friend of our program here. Kim from Michigan. Welcome, Kim. Scott from Northern Miami. Kinky from SoCal. Welcome, Kinky. So good to have you on here. Troy. Shout out to you, Troy. Condolences on your recent loss. We will all be praying for you and your family. Ferris from the UK. Kent Bromley. We've got Isaac in Vancouver. Cabrera. Right. We got Orange Juice Gang. We got Stuck in Florida. Angelia, stuck in Florida. We got Kendall in San Diego. We got the great Ramiro, check out Ramiro's channel, by the way, Unmasking Imperialism. It's great stuff, folks. It's awesome. It's amazing. We got Don D in NYC, great friend of the program, great activist in New York. He's out there in the streets spreading the message about Russia. Awesome stuff. We got Scott and Angie. We got Zachariah in Seattle. We got Naples, Harold Sullivan from Naples, Florida. We got Dalian in China. We got Theo, LOL Theo, Mo in Philly. We got Micah in Las Vegas. We got Based Ramiro, Greenwood Lake. We got Jenny Lynn from Cincinnati, Ohio. We got Tony in Oregon. We got Shani in Los Angeles. We got Lily in Boston. Wow, there's someone impersonating you on here, Lily. You should be careful with that. There you go. We got Johnny Depp in East Oakland. We got Fusion City now. We got, Red Illuminati. Great stuff. Red Illuminati does some fun stuff. That's awesome. Check out Red Illuminati. We got Jersey Baby, Big Mad Crab. They got great crab in New Jersey, don't they? I've been, the seafood in New Jersey is awesome, right? Chris in Salt Lake City. Now it's doing that thing where it doesn't let me put stuff on screens. Oh boy. What a life. What a life. Chris in Salt Lake City. Shout out to you, Chris in Salt Lake City. Shout out to you, Chris. Right. Shout out to you, Chris. We got Marissa in Washington State. Shout out to you, Marissa. Welcome to CPI. Welcome to the CPI. We got Ryan in Oakland. Ryan is awesome. Class analysis, great friend of the work that we do. Great CPI organizer and activist. Good stuff. We got Mohammed Murray in Utah. Very, very good. Defund the Oligarchy is in the house. Awesome. Amazing. Cool stuff. Cool beans. Good stuff. All right, folks. We got following you from Morocco, Galine Garcia Abdel Karim. We got Ricky Rosso from Texas. Very good. Good to have you, Ricky, beloved member of our community. Shout out to you. We got Jamie Nix in St. Paul, Minnesota. Juan from Quito, Ecuador. Great city. We got Benjamin from Shanghai. We got Deborah from Mexico. Shout out to you, Deborah. Great friend of our work here. Deborah is awesome. Good stuff. Good stuff. Right? Good stuff. All right, folks. We are now going to start. We got Stefan from Missouri. My dad's family's from Missouri, actually. Wild story. Welcome, Stefan. Good to have you here. Good stuff. We got AJ from Denver. Very good. AJ from Denver. All right, folks. We are now going to start answering our super chat questions. So the first super chat question. If you have another question, I'll put you on the list. I want to answer everybody's questions. So if you have a question, shoot me a super chat. I will try to give you an answer within reason. If you ask me a question about one of my friends or comrades and their personal life and their personal business, I ain't gonna answer it. If you ask me about my personal life, if you want to ask me a deeply intimate personal question, I probably won't answer that. If you, I don't know, within reason, right? I generally answer people's questions within reason. But if people, there's some things that should not be answered, but for the most part, I'll answer the questions. All right. First question, how does China deal with imperialism? Well, I don't know. At the beginning, 1949, when the Chinese communists took power. Well, before 1949, let's back up, right? During World War II, the Chinese aligned with the American imperialists and the British imperialists against the fascists, the Japanese imperialists, against the Germans, right? They aligned with the imperialists during the Second World War. They aligned against the Japanese invaders, against the German imperialists, Italian fascists. Then, after the Second World War, they wanted to be part of a coalition government, and they offered a coalition government. But Chiang Kai-shek, working as an agent of the United States, refused to create a coalition government. And Mao said, well, we want to have free elections. We want the Communist Party to be able to run in the elections. We want to have a coalition government. And Chiang Kai-shek said, no, not going to do it. And then Chiang Kai-shek said, and we're going to start disarming the Red Army. And at that point, Mao said, no, you're not. You're not going to take our guns away. You're not going to take control of the areas we liberated from the Japanese. And so there was the Chinese Civil War. And at that point, China was fighting against the imperialists. And ultimately, you had the People's Republic of China, created in 1949. And when the People's Republic of China was created, they were mainly aligned with the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union came to China in the 1950s. They built railroads, they built hospitals, they built power plants. 56, Khrushchev came in and gave his secret speech. At first, China was kind of supporting it. They had desalinization and the 100 Flowers campaign. But after a while, it became clear that Khrushchev was taking things in a different direction. So China denounced Khrushchev, denounced his ideas. And in response to that, you had the Sino-Soviet split. The Soviet Union pulled all their aid out of China, left buildings half built, wrecked China's economy. And at that point, China said, okay, well, the Soviets are trying to negotiate. Khrushchev is trying to negotiate with Kennedy, and he's bending over backwards, trying to appease the United States, and says, I'm not a revolutionary like Stalin. I'm not a hardliner. Oh, I'm a moderate. So in response to that, you had China tried to be ultra anti-imperialist, right? They had the Cultural Revolution, and they said revolution is the main trend in the world today. You had Lin Biao, who wrote "Long live the victory of people's war," and China was trying to be ultra anti-imperialist, and they said Khrushchev's a revisionist. He's a betrayer of the people's war. We want global communist revolution. Well, they did that for about a decade. That didn't work out too well because China was isolated, and it was economically isolated. So starting after the fall of Lin Biao, you had the Gang of Four. They came into power. And they started pivoting China to align with the United States. And they started saying, well, the Soviet Union are Soviet social imperialists. They preach socialism, but they practice fascism to preserve capitalism for the bosses. They started saying that the Soviet Union were social imperialists, that they were the main danger. They were worse somehow than the U.S. imperialists. And Nixon went to China. And eventually, starting in 1978, you had the reform and opening up. China brought in the imperialists to do business, brought them in to do business and set up joint ventures, free market zones, etc. But the whole time, they were maintaining state ownership and they were regulating where the imperialists could go. You can go here, you can't go here. And they used the fact that they had a lot of cheap labor, they had a lot of resources, and they brought in foreign investment very strategically. Very, very strategically, they brought in foreign investment. Shout out to my friend T, by the way, in China. Shout out to you, T. I have not forgotten you. I'm glad you're here watching these lives. Good friend of mine, longtime friend of mine. But anyhow, so they did that, right? And they were bringing in foreign investment. But then, as they were doing that, they were building up their own forces and building up their own forces and building up their own forces. Now, in the 90s, Jiang Zemin said that eventually China wanted to adopt the Western system. That was bullshit, right? I mean, they were never going to do that. But it was a clever ruse, right? Was there a section of the party that maybe thought that? Was it full on just an act of deception? We don't know. But Jiang Zemin said, oh, yeah, we want to adopt the Western system at some point. But then 2008 financial crisis happened. And immediately, right, all the capitalist sections of their economy crashed. So the Chinese Communist Party came in and, all right, they said, we're going to start building. And they built massive infrastructure and they stabilized the economy with state ownership. And then, there was a divide in the party. There was one section of the party that wanted to go more free market, and they were in Shanghai. And another section of the party that wanted to go back into the neo-Maoist way. It was in Chongqing. And the leader of the neo-Maoist faction in Chongqing was involved in all kinds of corruption, and he tried to kill somebody, and he was awful. So they arrested the guy of the neo-Maoist faction in Chongqing. He was arrested. But then Xi Jinping became the new leader of the Chinese Communist Party. And he came in and he launched the Mass Line campaign. And he said, we are going to re-emphasize communism. And one thing that they did is they had people write out the Chinese Communist Party's constitution. It became like a thing people would do in their own hand. They would write out the Communist Party's constitution, right? Minimum wage debate. They would write it out. They would write it out in their own hand. That was to make a statement, because if you read the Chinese Communist Party's constitution, very communist, right? We fight for the workers and peasants. We're building a socialist society. And so the fact that all these people, when a couple were getting married, they would both write out in their own hand, and have on display the Chinese Communist Party's constitution. They had a huge crackdown on corruption. Some of it was like interesting. They did like one day jail sentences. Somebody took a bribe. They'd sentence you to jail for only 1 day, just so you got a taste of how bad prison is, right? That's a pretty soft kind of thing to do, right? Sending someone to jail for their whole life is a pretty awful thing for a year. But, you know, some of these people, you get caught being corrupt and they say, all right, you're going to go to jail for one day and you're going to see just how bad jail is, right? Kind of creative, I think. You know, I think there's a lot of people that, you know, if they committed some crime, you send them to jail for one day, you'd never have to deal with them committing crime again. You know, I mean, imagine we had that here, right? Instead of sending people to jail for years, for months, to use them as free labor for some corporation, you know, we send somebody to jail for one day and they see just how awful it is. And the understanding is if you commit the crime again, you ain't going to be here for a day. You're going to be here for a couple years. A lot of people, it would have a much more deterrent effect, right? I think it's kind of smart. A one day jail sentence. You know, and they have a huge crackdown on corruption. They call it the mass line campaign. And now China is, you know, they're going around the world and they're going to the countries that the imperialists have devastated, and they're building infrastructure. They've got their state-controlled mega corporation, Huawei Technologies, which is a profit-sharing enterprise. They're doing great stuff. I mean, China, again, not everything is perfect in China. There's certainly corruption in China. I'm not going to deny that. There's a huge amount of corruption and there's problems. And people who live there tell me about some of those problems. But that said, their socialist system enables long-term economic growth. Capitalism is not in charge. The party is in charge. It's a socialist society. Next question. China deals with religion. Well, that's very interesting. I actually wrote an article, and I'm going to pull up this article. I wrote it for Mint Press News, and I'm going to see if it's, you know, they started messing with drones, Maupin, China. I wrote an article about the Chinese Communist Party and the way they deal with religion because I find the topic to be fascinating. And it's interesting. Now, the Mint Press version of the article is not coming up, but Transcend Media Service republished it. I don't know what Transcend Media Service is, but they republished it. That's coming up. I'm going to send you the Mint Press version. Mint Press is always better. It's a great site. I know Manar Adeli. She's a great person. You know, she writes for it. I'm going to see if I can find oh, here we go. Here's the Mint Press version of it. See, it's hard to get it to come up because the algorithms are rigged, right? Just like we talked about in the opening. I'm going to drop it in here. This is an article I wrote about the Chinese Communist Party and how they've evolved on the question of religion. Because it's very interesting. Again, one of the amazing things about the Chinese Communist Party is that they are constantly reinventing themselves. The way China is today is not the way they were yesterday, and it's not the way they are going to be tomorrow. And that is their strength, right? They are constantly adjusting their system. So one of the things that makes China a little bit different when it comes to the question of religion is that, you know, in the United States, you know, the main religion is Christianity. You got Judaism, you got Islam, you got Buddhism, but, you know, culturally, the main religion, like we have Christmas as a national holiday. Christianity is the main religion. It's like that in European countries too. Christianity is the major religion. You go to the Middle East, Islam is the major religion. China's not like that. China did not have a singular monotheistic religion that was their religion. Before the revolution, there were some Christians in China. There were some Muslims in China, Uyghurs and others. But for the most part, in China before the revolution, they had what they called Chinese religion. And it was different in every area. It was local customs, sacrificing animals, you know, bowing before statues, local customs, local superstitions. You had Taoism, you had Buddhism, but it was a mishmash. In every little region, they had their own practices, their own ceremonies, their own beliefs about spirits, their own beliefs about reincarnation. You didn't have a unified Chinese religion, right? And what's kind of fascinating is the anti-religious current in China long predates the Communist Party. Dr. Sun Yat-sen, the founder of the Chinese Revolution, Dr. Sun Yat-sen, one of his first acts was to smash a temple because the way traditional Chinese revolution was used, it was used to punish and humiliate the peasantry, right? So it's like, you know, the peasant, you know, he doesn't own his own land. He's a serf, basically. And he, you know, he has to work hard and then he has to give his, a big chunk of what he produces to the landlord. And then just to stick it to him, on top of giving, you know, his chunk of what he produces, a chunk of his crops, a chunk of his animals, he has to give it to the landlord. On top of that, he has to go to this temple and burn it and, like, you know, say some magic words. And the peasants really hated this because they're like, this is bullshit. This is bullshit. Like, but the landlord says, in addition to giving him a bunch of the crops that I worked hard to produce, in addition to giving him, one of the animals that I worked hard to breed and raise, now I've got to go light an animal on fire and say some magic words. It's bullshit, right? And they got these magical statues, and if I don't do this, the landlord will punish me, and it's bullshit. So Dr. Sun Yat-sen, the founder of the Chinese Revolution, he went to one of these temples where they were making the peasants burn their crops and say magic words and shit. And he went in there and he just smashed the idols. And he said, don't do this. And he broke them. And he smashed the idols. And he said, this is degrading. This is primitive. You peasants shouldn't have to take this. This is barbaric and primitive. We need science. We need advance. We need to be like Europe and have science and reason. And one of Dr. Sun Yat-sen's, long before Mao, people say Mao was so anti-religious. Dr. Sun Yat-sen was anti-religious. He smashed a temple, right? And he said, this is bullshit. And he smashed a temple. That's pretty radical. Very, very radical. Dr. Sun Yat-sen. And among Dr. Sun Yat-sen and among the Chinese nationalist KMT movement, there was a really strong anti-religious sentiment. There was a feeling that part of the way that Europe keeps us poor is they keep us in superstition. We need science. We need reason. We need to not be religious. And that was a big feeling, right? However, there was a little bit of a problem, right? So Dr. Sun Yat-sen dies. Mao and the communists were a faction in the KMT Nationalist Party. But then Chiang Kai-shek, comes into power. He's an anti-communist. He starts killing communists. So they flee into the countryside and they form the Red Army. And suddenly, instead of organizing people in the cities that are in the nationalist movement, instead of recruiting within the nationalist movement, they're recruiting peasants. So Mao is forming this army of peasants. And the peasant armies that he's forming, that Mao forms, those are people that grew up in the countryside that are deeply religious. They've had a lot of these practices. Again, they have resentment against the landlords. All right. Okay. All right. Eastern Orthodox communist. They have the landlords, etc. So Mao is building this army, and one of the problems that Mao's army has is that they don't have, they don't have very many medical supplies, right? This is a third world country, years of poverty, centuries of humiliation. They don't have it's like, you're having a battle and somebody gets shot. They don't go, oh, okay, take him to the hospital. There's no hospital, right? You're in the middle of the countryside. So a lot of these peasants are really into what they call traditional Chinese medicine, herbs, magical practices, acupuncture, poking people with needles, stuff like that. And a lot of the Chinese Communist Party leaders are like, this is a bunch of superstitious bullshit. We can't have this. But Mao says, look, we don't have big hospitals. And for a lot of these traditional Chinese folks, these kind of mystical religious practices that we call traditional Chinese medicine, these are really important. So Mao made a special decree. This is fascinating to me. Mao made a special decree that they would have traditional Chinese medicine, but they would not allow any of the religion that went with it, which I think is weird, but it's interesting. It's like a compromise, kind of like Stalin, right? Stalin brought back the church. Stalin, outlawed homosexuality and abortion. It's like, again, and you see that, right? Serious revolutionary leaders, when you're organizing the peasantry that have been practicing deeply traditional ways for thousands of years, but you're an ultra radical modernist communist, in order to build a mass movement, you have to make a compromise. Just like Stalin compromised and outlawed abortion and homosexuality in China, Mao compromised. And he said, all right, we're going to allow traditional Chinese medicine, but we're not going to allow any of the religion that goes with it. Interesting compromise. So the Chinese Communist Party was allowing traditional Chinese medicine, which is not, quote unquote, scientific, right? It's not recognized. They didn't do experiments to come up with it, but not allowing the religion to go with it. I think is fascinating. So fast forward, 1949, the Chinese Communist Party comes to power. Now, the Communist Party, they're atheists, they're dialectical materialists, but in China, there's a lot of people that are religious. So immediately after they come to power, they form the Chinese Christian Association. And there's a big denomination of Christians in China who became fans of Mao. I can't remember what they're called. So they formed this special, there's a church that's pro-Mao. And so they made them like an official church. They were allowed, even though the party was against religion. Plus, they created the Chinese Catholic Association. And it was Catholics that were loyal to the Communist Party. They created the Chinese Muslim Association, Muslims that are loyal to the Communist Party. They created a Buddhist group, and those groups still exist, right? And I forget, it's like the group, the Protestant group. It's like it's like a Chinese Protestant group. I forget what they're called. They're like the Four-Hand Path, or the four hands, or something like that. I can't remember what they're called. Was there any post-World War II hope for a socialist Japan? All right. And you know, they had this Protestant group that was pro-party, and they became allowed, and they had an association in the government. They had this Catholic group that was pro-party, and they were allowed. They had this Muslim group that was pro-party, they were allowed. This Buddhist group that was allowed. The main thing was that you had to recognize the government, right? I mean, just, you know, you can't be going around saying, I want to overthrow the party, I hate communism. We couldn't do that. If you were saying that, it didn't matter what your religion was, that wasn't allowed. But there were a number of religious groups that the party kind of set up so you could practice your religion. You could practice your religion, but you would do it in a way that was not against the party. And there's actually one very beautiful story I've heard, and it's in one of these books I read years ago. I can't remember where. It's a beautiful story, and it's this woman, and she was a Roman Catholic. She was a Chinese person who converted to Catholicism. After the communists came to power, she joined the Catholic Association. All right, you know, she joined the Catholic Association, and she went to church every Sunday. And she said, you know, the Communist Party might be good, but I'm a Catholic. And the story goes that she would go to church every Sunday, right? And she would pray that the people of China would have food. And she would pray that the people of China would you know, get the peasants would get their own land. And she would pray that you know, that women would no longer have to be prostitutes, and women wouldn't have to have their feet bound anymore. And she would pray that you know, that women could be part of the government. And she would pray for these things. And she said, I was going to church every Sunday, and I was praying for my Chinese people, and I was praying that we would raise up out of poverty. And I was praying that we would get electricity, and I was praying that we would get all these things. And she said, pretty soon I stopped going to church, because everything I was praying for was coming true. Everything I was praying for was coming true, but it wasn't coming true because God did it. It was coming true because the Communist Party did it. And she said, it was weird. She said, usually if people pray for stuff and it happens, that makes them more religious. But she said in her case, she was going to church every Sunday and she was praying for all these things. And the party, the Communist Party, was making it happen. And so she left the church, which I think is a fascinating story. It's kind of beautiful in a way, right? And that, you know, what the Chinese Communist Party accomplished, even in its first years, was miracles. No one ever talks about this, but like, you know, like there were people who never saw the sun if it wasn't for the Communist Party. There were people who worked in mines. There were these children. They would make children work in mines. And these children would, you know, they would get up before the sun came up. They would go down in the mine all day, and they wouldn't let them come out until the sun came, you know, was down again. So they lived in utter darkness. Utter darkness. They were worked in the mines, and they were like slave labor, right? Children were valued because they could go into places that people with bigger bodies couldn't go. So there were these children who spent their entire life never seeing the sun because they were being used for slave labor in mines. And the Chinese Communist Party came along, and suddenly they got to see the sun, right? Now, you want to talk about something that would change somebody's life. Holy shit, right? They wiped out drug addiction. Millions of Chinese people were addicted to opium. The British had flooded China with opium so they could dominate it economically. And in China, they went around and they outlawed opium. They confiscated all the opium pipes, and they instituted the death penalty for drug dealing, not for using. They cured addicts. They had treatment for addicts. But if you were dealing drugs, they shot you. And publicly, they would take you out in public and blow your head off in front of people. And all these people who'd spent their lives as opium addicts suddenly were cured of addiction. And they wiped out venereal disease. You know, China used to be infamous for prostitution centers where, you know, they'd have these famines where children would be starving to death. And so the British and the merchants would set up prostitution houses in Shanghai and places like that. And these British businessmen would, you know, take a boat to Shanghai and go to a whorehouse and have sex with children and underage women. And there were all these all these brothels in Shanghai and all these brothels, all these places where Chinese girls and women would be raped and were held as sex slaves, right? So venereal disease, syphilis was everywhere. And the party got rid of that. They got rid of that, and they set these people free from sexual slavery, and they wiped out venereal disease, and they got rid of venereal disease. These are miracles. These are miracles. These are utter miracles the Chinese Communist Party was carrying out. And no one gives them credit for this, right? I mean, nobody. In all the hundreds of years, China was dominated by British and American capitalism. None of them had ever done this. They taught people to read. They got rid of illiteracy. People were learning to read and write. They, a lot of these people in the 1960s, they had what they called barefoot doctors. And these were doctors who went to rural areas where there's people that had never seen a doctor before in their life until somebody showed up and they said, I'm from the Communist Party and I'm a doctor. And they trained people to be doctors and they sent them to the whole countryside. You have no idea how utterly amazing the Chinese Communist Party is. You have no idea how much they changed people's lives. I know that's a side rant, but it needs to be said because they don't get any credit for this. They're like, oh, there was a famine in 1962. Communism never accomplished anything. And it's like, these people had never seen a doctor if it weren't for the communists. These women would have never been freed from sexual slavery. These children who worked in the mines would never have seen the sun. Fuck you. Fuck you. If you're going to say that the Chinese Communist Party never accomplished anything, you're full of shit. I mean, you have no idea. And just like the first 10 years they were in power, they accomplished amazing things. Doctors, literacy, wiping out venereal disease, freeing people from sexual slavery, wiping out opium addiction. I mean, you want to talk about miracles. And so this woman that I was telling you about that started this whole rant, she was going to church every Sunday and praying for this stuff. And it was happening. It was happening. And she saw it happen with her own eyes. And she said, this is why she stopped being a Christian, because all the stuff she was praying for was happening, but she could see with her own eyes that God wasn't doing it. The Communist Party was doing it. And that's why she stopped being a Christian. I think that's a fascinating story. But anyway, back to my main point, right? Yeah, exactly. What does life expectancy prove? Anyway, back to my main point. Okay, so in the 50s, they had these associations where you could be Christian, you could be Catholic, you could be, Protestant, you could be Buddhist or whatever, but you had to recognize the party. You had to be part of one of their official associations. But in the 60s, they launched the Cultural Revolution. And the Cultural Revolution was all about purifying society. It was like, we are going to wipe away everything that's old and replace it with the new. That's what they were all about in the Cultural Revolution. One of the things they did in the Cultural Revolution is they smashed ancient temples, because these ancient temples, they were a symbol of feudalism, a symbol of superstition. So they would go to these ancient temples and just smash them, break them apart, right? And anything, you weren't allowed during the Cultural Revolution. There were superstitious practices people would do where they would roll the dice for good luck. You couldn't do that because that wasn't materialist. That wasn't communist. And during the Cultural Revolution, they viciously went after religious groups. That's true. Now, there's a lot of lies about it, okay? They'll tell you, this is one of their big lies. They'll tell you that they went after Muslims, Uyghurs, and they went after Tibetan Buddhists only. And they make it out like Han Chinese are racist, and they were oppressing Tibetan Buddhists, and they were oppressing Muslims. Well, there might be an element of truth in that, but they were also smashing Catholic churches and beating up Roman Catholic priests and nuns. And they were also going after Protestants. And they were also going after Buddhists, which is, it wasn't specific to Tibet. Yes, they did persecute Tibetan monks. Yes, they did persecute Muslims. That's true. And that has a special sting to it because these are ethnic minorities. These are national minorities in the country. So it has a special sting to it. But they were doing it to Han Chinese, were doing it to other Han Chinese too. They were being vicious to religion. The idea was these religious things, they're not in line with the party. They're not communist. And so, for example, one thing they would do, right, is, if you were a Catholic priest or a nun in China, you had to be loyal to the party. You were allowed to be a Catholic priest or a nun, but you had to be loyal to the party. And the party was trying to raise the population. So one thing I've heard about this is awful. They would force Catholic priests and nuns to fuck each other to prove that they were in favor of procreation. That's disgusting, right? But these red guards would, they grab a priest, they grab a nun, and they'd say, all right, are you in favor of raising the population of China? Are you against the party? And they would say, well, I guess we're not against it. Well, do you guys practice celibacy? Because that would mean you're against the party. And so they would basically force them to fuck each other to prove their loyalty to the party. That's sick. That's disgusting. The Red Guards, the Cultural Revolution was a nightmare. It was an utter nightmare, right? And they went after priests and nuns, and they went after Muslims, and they went after Tibetan Buddhist monks, and they went after Protestants, and they went after everybody. They went after everybody. It was awful. The Cultural Revolution in China was a nightmare. And there's denial. These ultra Maoists don't understand how disgusting the Cultural Revolution was. People didn't know the rules. There was no official rules. The rules changed. It was mob rule. These groups of teenagers called Red Guards would just go around and beat people up. Anyone was accused of not being loyal to the party, they'd get beaten up and publicly humiliated. They'd make people walk on glass. You know, you'd have to show how sorry you were. It was awful. The Cultural Revolution was a nightmare, right? The Cultural Revolution was an utter nightmare. It was horrible. It was awful, right? And Mao's wife, Jiang Qing, is a really evil person. She's a wrecker, right? That she's somebody, all she did her whole life is tear things down. She was this sexy movie star, and she married Mao, and that was like, you know, she was this sexy movie star, and her whole life, all she did is persecute people and punish people. She never built anything. She was never really an organizer. She was this sexy, good-looking movie star who married Mao because he was the leader of the party. And as Mao was getting old, she took over during the Cultural Revolution, and every day she went after somebody else. Women who wear makeup, punish them. You know, if you play a violin, that's a Western instrument, and punish them. And it was demented. She was a demented person. So after Mao died, eventually she got arrested, and when Mao's wife and the Gang of Four were arrested, everybody celebrated. It was a huge breakthrough because this nutty wrecker, this synthetic left piece of garbage had been terrorizing all the people of China. And one of the main things about the Gang of Four is they were degrowthers. They said that you don't need vast material abundance to have communism. They said it was possible to create a higher stage in poverty. They were basically saying China can stay poor, but if we just beat up enough people and terrorize enough people and force them to obey the party line, eventually we can have communism. Bullshit. They got, Deng Xiaoping came and he said, no, read Critique of the Goethe Program. The only way you can have communism was with vast abundance. And basically the Gang of Four, in their crazy, hysterical torturing of China, they were basically saying what Mother Teresa said: poverty is beautiful. It's like, oh, poverty is more pure. You're more communist. You're not worried about wealth or something. It was nutty, right? And Pol Pot in Cambodia was one of these. It was awful. So when the Cultural Revolution was over, then they arrested the Gang of Four. But there's a side note, okay? So this is really weird. This is a very, very weird thing, okay? So I told you that during the Cultural Revolution, they were persecuting priests and nuns. They were persecuting Buddhists. They were persecuting different groups, persecuting Muslims. However, traditional Chinese medicine, this is very interesting. Traditional Chinese medicine, they liked. Why? I don't know, right? But they loved traditional Chinese medicine. And they made a movie about curing kids who were deaf with acupuncture. You can actually watch it. Mao Cures Deaf Mutes, it's called. Mao Cures Deaf Mutes. And you can watch it. And it's all about how with acupuncture, they cured deaf mutes. You read Edgar Snow's book, The Long Revolution by Edgar Snow. It's about his last visit to China before he died. Edgar Snow, there's a chapter called Abortion with Acupuncture. And it's how this woman has an abortion, and the only anesthetic she needs is acupuncture. And they were promoting the hell out of traditional Chinese medicine because it was not Western, right? The idea is the West is capitalist and not revolutionary, but we're communists and we're ultra-revolutionary, so we got traditional Chinese medicine. That was a little bit weird. They're promoting traditional Chinese medicine, but all other religion is not allowed. They're not promoting any of the religion that goes with traditional Chinese medicine. They're just doing the practices. They're doing the acupuncture. They're burning the stuff. They got this, the what do you call it? The herbs and stuff. But that's a little bit interesting, right? During the Cultural Revolution, they really pushed traditional Chinese medicine. So fast forward to when Deng Xiaoping took power in the 1980s, or in the 1978, he took power. Deng Xiaoping said, all right, we got to fix this with religious people. So Deng Xiaoping published a document, and he said, we need to treat religious people with respect. And the Chinese Communist Party completely changed its relationship with religious groups, right? They changed their relationship with the religious groups, and they apologized. They apologized to Tibetan Buddhists. They apologized to Muslims. They apologized to Catholics and others. It was really amazing. They really turned things around. And they apologized, and they recognized that the Gang of Four, what they did was wrong, right? And they have actually now at this point in China, there is a government program where they build mosques. You'll never hear about this on American TV. They want to make it sound like all Muslims in China are persecuted. There is a government program in China where the Chinese government builds mosques, and it builds Islamic seminaries. And in Tibet, they build Buddhist monasteries and temples, right? They do this. And there is an official Chinese Communist Party wing of the Catholic Church. And for a long time, the Catholic Church didn't recognize it. But a few years ago, I think it was 2016, maybe 2017, Pope Francis came out and recognized the pro-Communist Party wing of the Catholic Church. So the Vatican acknowledges that these priests and nuns who support the Communist Party are real priests and nuns. And the Vatican and China are getting closer. So China has really come a long way on this, right? It's really come a long way. The Chinese Communist Party promotes atheism and dialectical materialism, but now they're building mosques, they're building Buddhist temples. The Catholic Church that is in China is recognized by the Vatican. The official Vatican recognized churches everywhere. More people go to church on Sunday morning in China than in America. That is a fact. You can take that to the bank. On Sunday morning in China, there are more people going to church than there are in the United States. That is a fact. So anyone who tells you, oh, all Christianity is illegal in China, bull honky, malarkey. That's not true. There are more people going to church on Sunday morning in China than there are in the United States. Now, there are different religions in China. The Catholic Church functions openly at this point. A number of Protestant churches function. However, there are some churches that are anti-party, that say the Communist Party is evil and needs to be overthrown. And you can't have those. That's just a fact, right? If you're organizing a church that's against the party, not going to happen, right? And there are some cults. And now back to the traditional medicine thing. And this is fascinating to me. So I told you that during the Cultural Revolution, traditional Chinese medicine flourished. Well, when Deng Xiaoping came into power, right, the traditional Chinese medicine stuff was still going strong. And there was a lot of it going around that was bullshit. And there was a lot of lying and con artists. And it was bullshit. And Deng Xiaoping and the party said, all right, we're going to stop this, right? We're going to stop. The party is not going to fund traditional Chinese medicine anymore. We're going to tell people that traditional Chinese medicine is bullshit. And the Chinese Communist Party came out and said, they didn't outlaw it. You can still do it. There's still plenty of traditional Chinese medicine in China. But the Communist Party came out and they said, yeah, we don't believe in traditional Chinese medicine anymore. We're just not into it. We don't agree with it. And at that point, and this is fascinating, that's where the Falun Gong comes from. The Falun Gong was started by members of the Chinese Communist Party who believed in traditional Chinese medicine. And it's a breakaway from the Chinese Communist Party who believe in traditional Chinese medicine. That's who they are. And they were basically a breakaway from the party that believed in traditional Chinese medicine. They have their own interpretation of Buddhism. And they're a crazy anti-communist cult. And during the 90s, they were engaged in all kinds of, rioting and destabilization, trying to overthrow the Chinese government. Chinese government outlawed them finally. But that's actually where the Falun Gong comes from. The people who run Epoch Times, they are people who wanted the Chinese Communist Party to keep promoting traditional religion when they didn't. That's who they are. Fascinating stuff. So you asked me, it's a very long answer about religion in China. I gave you a very long answer because it's fascinating. This is very interesting stuff to me. I've done a lot of research about this, and it's fascinating. It's very, very interesting. How am I doing? You should check out Zhan Yu. He's great. How am I doing, Zhan Yu? You know this stuff way better than I am. Am I doing a good job? Let me know how I'm doing. I am curious how I'm doing. Am I getting my history right? I'm sure I'm Zhan Yu will be able to know whether I'm doing a good job or not. So I hope I get the Zhan Yu stamp of approval because he knows this stuff way better than I do. I've never been to China. I'm simply giving, my understanding after years and years of reading about this and all of that. And I hope that this is an accurate depiction. All right, next question. The mass line. The mass line. The mass line. Thank you. Wow. I'm honored. I have never been so honored. Zhan Yu is telling me I got this right. And if anyone would know, it's Zhan Yu. This guy's awesome. So if Zhan Yu says that I got this pretty good, then I feel like I've accomplished a good thing here. If anyone knows the Chinese communist history, it's this guy. Check out his channel. Check out his work. If anyone knows Chinese communist history, it's him. And if he's saying I got it right, then I am honored. I'm honored. I'm honored. I'm sure I made some factual errors. And John, you feel free to send me a message about what I got wrong. Feel free to correct me. But wow, I couldn't be more honored to see that Jean Yu says I did pretty good. That's awesome. I'm honored. I'm honored. Wow. Makes me proud of myself. All right. The mass line. The mass line is a concept that comes up. There's a chapter in Mao's little red book. It's called the mass line. And it's about how communists have a duty to go from the masses to the masses. The idea is to go among the masses and find out what they want. And then go to the masses and show them how the party can give it to them. From the masses to the masses. On the one hand, you just go to the broad masses of people in China and tell them, you know, this is what we believe. They're not going to listen to you because why should they listen to you? However, if you just go to them and say, what do you want? And you're for whatever they want, you're not pushing communism. But the mass line is the party's method of going to the masses, finding out what the masses want, and giving it to them. From the masses to the masses. The revolutionaries are the fish, and the masses are the water. The little red book Mao says, how do you judge the youth? You judge a youth by whether or not he integrates himself with the broad masses of people, right? And it's this idea that the place of the communists is with the people, finding out what the people want and offering them a road forward to give it to them. A transitional program, right? And that if the party becomes separate from the masses, it will lose. And if the party just tails the masses and never gives them leadership and never teaches them anything they don't know, it will also lose. It's what Lenin wrote about and what is to be done, right? You don't want to be engaging in tailism, and you don't want to be engaging in ultra-leftism and being isolated. You want to be among the masses, finding out what is on the minds of the masses and giving it to them in a way that only the communists can offer. From the masses to the masses. That is the line. That's the line. From the masses to the masses. From the masses to the masses. That's the idea. That's the mass line. And these are concepts that were developed by the Bolsheviks. These are concepts that were developed by Karl Marx. But Mao made them specific to Chinese circumstances. And in the little red book, he developed a specific method called the mass line. When you go among the masses, when you go into a workplace or a university, you divide the people into three categories: the backward, the center, and the advanced. Right? You go to your workplace, you go to your university, and you say, all right, who are the advanced, who are the center, and who are the backward? And then your strategy is to isolate the backward, neutralize the center, and mobilize the advanced. That's the idea. So, from the masses to the masses, and you go to a place and you say, all right, who are the advanced here? That's who I'm going to align with and mobilize and become the leader of. Who are the center? I want to be friendly with them and keep them neutral. And who are the backward? And I'm going to isolate them. Right? This is the method that communists use, right? And then the communists would go into a factory and they'd say, all right, these are the advanced workers. I'm going to mobilize them. I'm going to empower them. These are the center workers. We're going to be friendly with them and make sure that they're not our enemies. And these are the backward ones. We're going to isolate them. This is the mass line. It's a method that is utilized by communists. And it's, again, these are ideas that Mao developed based on reading What Is to Be Done and reading the Bolshevik strategies, but also based on his knowledge of Chinese culture and history and applying them to Chinese conditions. So that's the mass line, from the masses to the masses. The revolutionaries are the fish, the masses are the water. And that is my critique. You'll notice that the name of my essay, critiquing Marxism and critiquing the Party of Socialism and Liberation, is called The Masses Are the Water. That's from the Mao quote, because this is what the Marxites don't understand. They think the movement is the water. They think the group of people who go to liberal protests is the water. No, you can't make if every hippy-dippy liberal that went to protests was a communist, wouldn't make a damn difference. The masses are the water, and the revolutionaries are the fish, right? And so that's why the essay that I wrote critiquing the Marxite movementarian revisionist line is called The Masses Are the Water. I was calling them out. I was calling them out. And there you go. Synthetic lefts isolate the center and the backwards and get part of the advanced. We like to join our cool kids club. Exactly. That's basically what they're doing. Isolate the advanced isolate the advanced and have the advanced walk around and try to outdo each other about who's the best among the advanced. I mean, it's just, it's not a winning strategy. There you go. All right. Next question. Gaddafi's third way. Gaddafi called his form of socialism the third universal theory. In the Green Book, there are 3 chapters: democracy, socialism, and the social basis of the third universal theory. Basically, Gaddafi argued that dictatorship of the proletariat was not correct for Libya because the proletariat was not the majority. The factory workers of Libya were not the majority. And that Libya was basically, it was a state of the entire people. You had the Bedouin farmers, you had the small business owners, you had the factory workers, you had, and everybody, the military, and you had these popular assemblies that represented all the people. And that if Libya had been a dictatorship of the proletariat, like 10% of the population would have ruled over everybody else. And that was Gaddafi's critique of Marxism. If you read the Green Book, that's what he says. He says that Libya was not going to adopt the dictatorship of the proletariat. Instead, they were going to have the third universal theory, which is green socialism or Islamic socialism. And that's Gaddafi's critique. One thing that is interesting is Gaddafi in the Green Book actually says that Libya aims to achieve full communism, that they're going to raise the productive forces so high that the need for the government fades away. People say that he plagiarized from Engels. I don't think he plagiarized. I think he just knew his shit, right? Gaddafi actually wanted, during the 1980s, he declared that he wanted Libya to join the Warsaw Pact. Gaddafi was pretty badass in a lot of ways, but yes, he had a critique of Marxism, arguing that in Libya, which was a country that was not yet fully developed, establishing the dictatorship of the proletariat didn't quite make sense, and that instead they needed to have some kind of socialist government that built community assemblies that represented all the people. Now, some people might argue that there were sections of the military in Libya, and this is one argument. I think Sam Marcy makes this argument in the video clip I shared, or the audio clip of him I recently shared, that within the military, a lot of the military officers who were close to Gaddafi, they were from the ruling class of Libya. And Gaddafi was empowering them because the military was very important in Libya. He was empowering them, but they had anti-communist ideas. And so the reason that he bashes Marxism in the Little Red Book is to say to those guys, don't worry, I'm not a communist, but I'm also not a capitalist, right? I've got my third universal theory. He's trying to accommodate reactionary elements in the military. I don't know if that's true or not. I mean, when he's calling for them to join the Warsaw Pact, when he's declaring that full communism can be achieved in Libya, I mean, it sounds like this guy was just a Deng Xiaoping before Deng Xiaoping. He realized that if the government nationalized everything in Libya, Libya would get poor. It wouldn't have foreign investment. And so he passed a law. No profit could be made from housing. No landlords in Libya. Amazing. No profit from food. It was illegal to make profit from food. So food was only nationalized and was by the government. But you could have a store, you could have a restaurant, you could have a hotel, That's forward thinking. He was Deng Xiaoping before he was Deng Xiaoping, right? No profit from food, free education, free healthcare for everybody, and these popular assemblies and popular committees where these Soviets basically that he built that were the basis of his government, right? So there you go. Yeah, I mean, I think Gaddafi's Libya was a socialist country. They did not have socialism. It was kind of this pride thing. We got our own ideology here. We got our own third universal theory. But I think it was very much a socialist country. I think there's no question about it. I mean, they were sending guns to the communist fighters all over the world. They were, aligned with the Soviet Union. They wanted to have full communism. They wanted to join the Warsaw Pact. It was a state-run economy. If Libya wasn't socialist in the 80s, somebody who lived there is telling me that I'm right. Yeah, it was socialism. They didn't call it that. They didn't call it socialism, or they didn't call it Marxism, Leninism. They called it Islamic socialism, Kibism, whatever. But that's what it was. All right, next question. Judge politicians by what they do, not what they say. Absolutely. Absolutely. Anyone can say anything, but if they don't do it, doesn't matter. All right. Did Khrushchev transition to a state of the whole people too early? No. honestly, here's the thing about that, right? So when China and the Soviet Union had their falling out, they called out Khrushchev because he changed the Soviet constitution to not say dictatorship of the workers and peasants, but instead to say a state of the entire people. So you have to remember, right? Marxism calls for the dictatorship of the proletariat. The idea is that we live under the dictatorship of the capitalists. The capitalists dictate. Those with the money and wealth, they control the government. So the idea is that socialism means the workers, the working class dictates, right? The working class will rule. Now, Friedrich Engels, in Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific, he says that the working class takes power on behalf of all of society, meaning that the small business owners are aligned with the working class. There might even be some capitalists who are aligned with the working class. The working class is the majority. The working class, the wage workers, are the majority, but they take power pretty much on behalf of all society, right? Karl Marx says the working class wins the battle for democracy, meaning majority rule. So the idea is the workers are the majority, so the working class wins the battle for democracy and becomes the dictatorship of the proletariat. So that makes sense in Europe. That makes sense in France and Germany and the United States at the time because the working class, the wage workers, are the majority. In Russia, that doesn't quite make sense because the working class are only like 10% of the population. Most of the country are peasants. So Lenin says, we can't call for the dictatorship of the proletariat in Russia. We'll call for a revolutionary dictatorship of the workers and peasants. And Leon Trotsky says, no, you can't do that. Peasants are reactionaries. Peasants are stupid. Peasants are not proletarians. Peasants want to own their own farms. They're petty bourgeois. They aspire to become petty bourgeois. You can't do that. Oh, no, you can't. You can't do that. Marx said dictatorship of the proletariat. You can't do that. You read this. Lenin and Trotsky had big polemics against each other. Because Trotsky said you can't have a revolutionary dictatorship of the workers and peasants, only a dictatorship of the proletariat. Well, Lenin says, no. I mean, if we're going to have a revolution in Russia, we can't have 10% of the population rule over everybody else. The majority are peasants. So we're going to have a revolutionary dictatorship of the workers and peasants. And that's what the Soviet Constitution said. It was a revolutionary dictatorship of the workers and peasants. When Khrushchev came in, he changed the Soviet Constitution to say it was a state of the entire people. So what? I mean, again, they were kind of watering down the Marxist ideology, you could argue, but it was pretty much the same. I mean, it's not like he changed. It's not like immediately the economy changed or something like that. That was, again, it was a sign that the Soviet Union was getting less enthusiastic about communism. But the way the Maoists make a big deal out of that, it's like, aha, see, they restored capitalism. It's no longer the dictatorship of the proletariat. Well, that's ultra left. That's silly thinking, right? Words don't define reality. Words do not define reality. This is a really common problem I see among communists. A country's not socialist because the leader of it said words that are wrong. Doesn't matter. Stalin was against abortion and outlawed homosexuality, so the Soviet Union's not socialist. I'm sorry. A society can have the banks, factories, and industries organized by the people and have a policy on homosexuality and abortion that I don't agree with. I think abortion should be legal. I think homosexuality and gay marriage should be legal. But a society can not have that and still be socialist. Fidel Castro said this. No, this is a really common thing that the leader of a socialist country does something bad or says something bad, so it's not socialist. Socialism is property relations, folks. Socialism is about property relations. It's not about using the right magic words. It's not about always having the correct policy. There you go. Next question. All right. Stefan asks, what kind of music do I listen to? My favorite type of music is folk music. Always loved folk music. Woody Guthrie, Pete Seeger, the Weavers. I listen to traditional Irish music a lot. That's the kind of music I listen to. I'm very much a folk music kind of guy. I like strong melodies, right? Triumphant marches and strong melodies. I'm a strong melodies kind of guy. I want to listen to, every so often you'll be a song that has like a strong enough melody, it just sticks in your head. For example, I don't know if there's anyone here who's ever been to Cornell University. I have never been to Ithaca, New York. I have never been to Cornell University, but I absolutely love their anthem, their alma mater. Far above Cayuga's water, with its waves of blue, stands our noble alma mater, glorious to view. And it's an Irish anthem, right? It's an Irish melody. It comes from the song Annie Lyle, which is a very sad song about a woman dying of disease. But it's like, it's one of those triumphant, like dun 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 dun. Da, 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 da. I love it. I love that. I love that anthem. I'm not a good musician. It's probably cringe singing. There's probably people like killing themselves right now going, oh, make it stop. Make it stop. I'm sorry. That's just something you have to deal with. I love strong melodies, strong, powerful melodies. That's what I like. And you get that in folk music. You get that in marches. You get that in hymns. You get that in national anthems. That's what I like. That's what I like. I like strong melodies. And you get that in rock sometimes, not all the time, but I like strong, triumphant melodies. That's the kind of guy I am. There you go. Next question. Has Trump permanently altered the Republican Party? No, material conditions have. The material conditions have. You can't be neocons. When the economy is crashing, when people are losing their jobs and schools and homes, and the economy is in a state of absolute misery, you can't be a neocon. Neocons are like, don't fix it if it ain't broke. You can't do that, right? So you need to go to anti-establishment and populistic edges of right wing if the right wing wants to survive. CUNY used to be free, says Peter, and he's absolutely right. It used to be free. I mean, it's unbelievable. We have no idea how bad the economy is now. Trotsky on the Chinese Revolution. We spent a lot of time talking about how much we hate Trotsky on here, don't we? It's a little bit much, but that's okay. Trotsky's position on the Chinese Revolution was that the peasantry of China was not revolutionary. His position was that because Mao's Red Army was dominated by peasants, it couldn't be revolutionary. I have quotes to back that up. And he argued that the Chinese Communist Party dissolving and becoming a faction within the KMT. Yeah, that's a good point, Christian. Trotsky's attitude toward the peasants seems very similar to the synthetic left attitude toward the masses. Yeah, you're really right. And it's the same kind of anti-populist thinking. He justified it with Marxian critique about the proletariat versus the peasantry, but it's the same kind of thinking. It's this anti-populism. Trotsky was a cosmopolitan intellectual. That is correct. But there you go. Yeah, I mean, Trotsky argued that by the Chinese communists joining the KMT, that was selling the revolution down the river, that somehow made them responsible for the political repression that was rained down on them years later. That's bullshit. So there you go. Next question. All right. Mother Teresa was friendly to Albania. That's true. Yes, Mother Teresa. It's weird because Albania is the only atheist state in history. China, the Soviet Union, officially, there was no state religion. The state was neutral on matters of religion. Albania is the only country in history to have actually declared to have an atheist government. And yet that's where Mother Teresa was close with. She was Albanian. In the 80s, they had like shortages of goods and stuff. So Mother Teresa was going to Albania and Enver Hoxha was taking her around. And it's a little bit weird. It's a little weird. And Hoxhists, supporters of Enver Hoxha in Albania, don't ever talk about this. It's a little bit embarrassing. It's pretty damn weird. I'll just tell you that much. Mother Teresa was a reactionary, if there ever was one. She said poverty is beautiful. And on top of that, she loved Enver Hoxha, which is weird as hell. And part of the reason that Albania was an atheist state was because Muslims and Christians in Albania have been fighting each other for thousands of years. The communists wanted to hold the country together, so they said, we're outlawing all religion. No more Islam, no more Christianity, just communism. That was the idea. And it was a way to hold the country together. Didn't work ultimately, right? Didn't ultimately work. But it was their attempt to hold the country together by getting rid of deeply entrenched religious divisions. All right. Minimum wage debate. Look, the minimum wage generally makes life better than not having it, right? If the capitalist is required to pay a certain wage, then, he can't just pay whatever he wants, right? And it's generally a good thing. The problem is the minimum wage is generally very low, but it also sets the bar, right? The wages of non-minimum wage workers have to be higher than the minimum wage. And that there's a very common argument. At the time they raise the minimum wage, they'll say, oh, inflation will just go up. Bullshit, right? I mean, every time they raise the minimum wage, we don't see inflation as a result. I mean, there might be some, but not really, right? That prices are set by the capitalist market. They're not set by the capitalists don't go, oh, I'm paying more for labor now, better ratchet up the prices. It's not how it works. The capitalist price is set based on his competitors, what he can sell for, what people are willing to pay. So the idea that the capitalist has more labor costs because the minimum wage goes up, and he's like, oh shit, raise them prices. No, doesn't happen. Doesn't happen because his competitors aren't going to do that, right? And if the capitalists all got together and were to conspire to do that, right? And this could happen. Right? If the capitalists all got together and said, all right, if those damn Democrats raise the minimum wage, we're going to rise the prices up. That'll show them. They do that. That's called price fixing. That's illegal. Now, not that things like that don't happen. I think the big, oil companies, the four super major oil companies, Shell, Chevron, ExxonMobil, and BP, they basically do that. I mean, they don't do it directly because that's illegal, but, their prices are all about the same. Gas stations in the United States, the price of gas is all pretty much the same, so it's just something to think about. All right, next question. And I'll just quickly say, Karl Marx has a very good pamphlet on this question. It's called Wages, Prices, and Profits, because this was an argument that ultra-leftists were making. There was a group of ultra-leftists in Marx's day who argued for what they called the iron law of wages. And they said, oh, you should never go on strike for higher wages because then the prices will just go up. The prices will just go up, so you just have to preach communism and social revolution because there's this, as soon as the wages go up, the prices just go up, so there's nothing you can do about it. The iron law of wages. The wages are always going to be the same because as soon as the wages go up, the prices just go up, and the wages are always the same because of inflation. It's a bullshit argument, and Karl Marx shows the math. He does the math. If you read Wages, Prices, and Profits, he goes over the mathematics of showing that that's bullshit. It just doesn't happen that way. Prices are not set by labor costs. It's a factor, but it's not the primary factor. So the idea that, oh, these workers are going to go on strike and they're going to get higher wages, but then the capitalists will just raise the prices. So you just have to tell them to have communism or we should oppose the strike. This is a bullshit argument you hear, and it's just not factual, right? Economic data does not confirm it. And Karl Marx actually refutes it. And I remember reading this pamphlet at the time in Ohio, that they were raising the minimum wage. And the argument from all the Republicans was, oh, well, if you raise the minimum wage, that'll just cause everyone's inflation to go up. And Karl Marx has this very pamphlet on why that's not the case. So there you go. Raising the minimum wage is good for the economy. Very good. All right. Eastern Orthodox communists. There's a lot in Cuba. The Eastern Orthodox Church in Cuba exists and it practices, and there are many Cubans who converted to Eastern Orthodox. And the leader of the Communist Party of Russia, Gennady Zyuganov, is also an Orthodox Christian. And there are many Eastern Orthodox Christians in the Russian Communist Party, the Communist Party of the Russian Federation. That's all that I know of. I'll just tell you that much. That's really all that I know. There is a lot of bad blood between the Russian Orthodox Church and the Communist Party. The Communist Party, they were the ones that, tore down all the churches and, had anti-religious campaigns. So there's some pretty bad blood there. However, Stalin is the guy who re-legalized the Russian Orthodox Church. So because of that, and because of the fact that Stalin went to seminary school, there are a lot of Russian Orthodox practitioners who do believe that Stalin was a good guy. And there are many places in Russia where you will find there's a divide. I would say there's a large section of the Russian Orthodox Church that says Stalin was an evil anti-communist. We don't like it. Or Stalin was an evil anti-Christian atheist. We don't like him. But there's also a large section of the Russian Orthodox Church who says, no, Stalin went to seminary school. Stalin brought our religion back in order to defeat the Nazis. Stalin was a true believer all along. Stalin made great Russia. So there are different opinions. There are some Russian Orthodox people who like Stalin. There's some Russian Orthodox people who don't like Stalin. Lenin is pretty universally hated among Russian Orthodox Christians. They think Lenin persecuted religion, was an atheist, anti-religious. The Bolsheviks were anti-Christian. That's a pretty standard feeling. The Russian Orthodox Church has Tsar Nicholas II as a saint and his family as a saint. So anti-Bolshevik, anti-Lenin sentiments is pretty universal among Russian Orthodox Christians, but pro-Stalin feelings are they're there. It's mixed, right? I'm saying this as an outsider. I'm not Russian Orthodox. I'm just telling you based on what I've observed. So yes, there are some Russian Orthodox people who think Stalin was a great leader of Russia, who re-legalized the church, and he was so good because he was trained in a seminary school. He had a more or less Christian worldview, etc. Right? And that he was rooted in what makes Russia non-Western. They're more Eastern and traditional ways, and that there's a narrative where Stalin is a friend of the Russian Orthodox Church, and there's a narrative where Stalin is an evil communist dictator, and he's part of what Lenin started, and he's bad. In the Russian Communist Party, it's largely, the feeling that Stalin was good for the church. And, among like the Liberal Democratic Party and among, the feeling is largely that Stalin was bad for the church. There's division. The Russian Orthodox Church at this point, it's in the Constitution. It is the state religion of Russia. Okay. So even though it's an institution that the Communist Party overthrew, it's the state religion of Russia, and Russia is standing against U.S. imperialism. And Russia is very much, as a society, coming to terms with the fact that they ain't like the West. They have their unique culture and their history, and that there are things about America and there are things about Western Europe that are not the way they are, right? And, so the Russian Orthodox Church is a big part of Russia's unique culture and history. So because of that, it's going to be a lot less anti-communist, because communism and Stalin, that's also a unique part. It's kind of like how in China, there's a revival of Confucianism and Maoism. They're putting up pictures of Mao everywhere in China now, but they're also putting up pictures of Confucius. Well, Mao hated Confucius. Mao was trying to wipe out Confucianism. Doesn't matter, because Confucius is part of China's unique identity that makes it not the West. Mao is also part of China's unique identity that makes it not the West. In the West, we think Confucianism is authoritarian, patriarchal traditionism. It's authoritarian, medieval. We don't like it. Well, in China, the Confucian way of thinking built their civilization. In the West, we think that Mao is an evil mass murdering dictator who did nothing but create gulags and starve people and murder people. In China, they say Mao is a great leader who started the communist revolution. So as the USA attacks China more, China is coming to terms with the fact that, okay, Confucius and Mao are both part of our unique identity. In Russia, similar thing. Again, in the West, we think the Russian Orthodox Church is this stodgy old medieval institution. That's not, we're secular. We love marriage. It's this stodgy patriarchal medieval thing. In the West, we also think Stalin was a brutal killer and mass murderer and communism doesn't work. Well, in Russia, they think the Russian Orthodox Church is a great institution that lays out the values of their civilization. And in Russia, they say Stalin is a great leader who defeated the Nazis and raised people out of poverty and built up Russia into a modern country. So Stalin and the Russian Orthodox Church can start to walk hand in hand. Not for everybody. There's a lot of people in Russia who are Russian Orthodox who hate Stalin. There's a lot of people in Russia who like Stalin and hate the Russian Orthodox Church. It's not universal, but this is when people start talking about Dugin, right? I always get all this flack. Oh, you're a Duginist, Caleb. Dugin didn't make this up. He's just pointing to things that are happening, okay? And when Dugin talks about the fourth political theory, this is what he's talking about. That the Russian Orthodox Church is considered right-wing. Stalin is considered left-wing. But in a weird way, in Russia nowadays, Stalin and the Russian Orthodox Church kind of go together in this weird way that they're against the West. In China, Confucianism is considered right-wing, traditional, authoritarian. Kids, obey your parents, obey your teacher, duty to it's this traditional, authoritarian, conservative stuff. That's considered right-wing. Mao, on the other hand, is this ultra-communist revolutionary. He's considered left-wing. But now in China, this right-wing view and this left-wing view kind of go together against the West. And Dugin says this in his fourth political theory book, and it's pretty fucking profound. You read the fourth political theory, Dugin's making a good point that, Bolivarianism has elements of traditional indigenous religion. Abortion is not legal in a lot of the Bolivarian countries, not in Venezuela, not in Nicaragua. Nicaragua has some of the strictest anti-abortion laws in the world. But they also have a super socialist government. And again, around the world, in countries that are fighting against U.S. imperialism and are raising their people out of poverty, you see this weird convergence between ideas that are left-wing and ideas that are right-wing against liberalism. And liberalism is individualism. And it manifests itself in the economic form in terms of free markets. You're on your own, buddy. You know what? Sink or swim. We don't need a minimum wage. We don't need union contracts. We don't need protections. Sink or fucking swim, pal. You're on your own, buddy. No one owes you nothing. Get a job, loser. That's one way liberalism manifests itself. The other way liberalism manifests itself is there's no truth, man. There's no God. There's no right and wrong. Everything's a matter of opinion. You can make up your own truth. And who says you have any obligation to your family? And who says you have any obligation to your country? Screw patriotism. Screw the family. Screw religion. It's just you on your own, man. Just discover your own individualism, right? Well, these are both liberalism because liberalism is about the individual. Economic liberalism is championed by the right wing. Social liberalism is championed by the left wing. And in Russia and in China and in Iran and Nicaragua and Venezuela and Cuba, people are rejecting social liberalism. And they're saying, we believe in religion and we believe in our nation and we believe in the family and we believe in traditional values and economic liberalism. And they're saying, we're against capitalism. We want a government that fights for the people. This is just a fact. Okay, this is happening. Dugin didn't make this up. He observed it. Right? Dugin didn't start becoming popular in Russia until the 90s. But this stuff was already starting to happen. Dugin didn't make this happen. He's observing it. And some of his observations, where he says there's no such thing as historical progress, I think are wrong. I think he's dead wrong about. But it's this idea that saying this is Nazi is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. It's utterly stupid, right? I don't know if people saw today. The Communist Party of Louisiana, the official wing of the Communist Party of Louisiana, tweeted out that they had found a CPI member who was infiltrating them and was trying to seize party funds with blackmail. Crickets, please. And I tweeted in response, I have a feeling that this CPI member is also a good friend of the Easter Bunny, Bigfoot, and Santa Claus. And then they deleted their tweet and they said, oh, it wasn't a CPI member. It was a supporter of Haas. And then Haas tweeted out, no. The Communist Party is more against me than they're against Joe Biden. They support Joe Biden. They've got his back against Trump. They've got his back. They think, anyone criticizing Kamala Harris is a Nazi. They are more obsessed with having an internal purge of anyone who says anything that sounds like what I say on here than they are with challenging Joe Biden, the starvation president, austerity, and his drive toward World War III. They put out an article saying that Russia is a bigger threat to world peace than the United States. You want to talk about a poor excuse for a party? Do you really think that I would waste my time trying to take over a party that is that incompetent? On their official accounts, they're announcing that people are working for me. And then an hour later, they're like, oh shit, they're not. This isn't some loser on his own account. This is on their official party accounts. We've got screenshots, folks. On their official account, they're tweeting out, we caught a CPI, Caleb Maupin, infiltrator, bum, bum, bum. And then an hour later, they're like, oh, actually, we didn't. These are bumbling fools. These are idiots. These are utter bumbling fools and idiots. And the fact that they're spending way more energy fighting me, fighting Duginism, fighting Russia, than fighting Biden. Biden is creating food shortages. There are going to be food shortages this summer because of Joe Biden. Working people won't eat because of Joe Biden. And I'm the threat, and Russia's the threat. Are you kidding me? I mean, I don't even know where to begin. I mean, and it's and then people think that what I'm doing is I'm sitting back, I stream every day, right? So when do I have the time to do this? It's every morning I wake up, you know, and it's like I have a staff room and Keaton's there and Lily's there and, you know, and a bunch of secret CPUSA members are there. And I have like this map and I put on like a military hat and I'm like, all right, in District 14, they're going to vote this way. Then in District 14 and District 16, they're going to vote this way. And soon we shall conquer the Communist Party for Donald Trump, and we shall use it to destroy Kamala Harris. Why? Because we're racist. That's why. We're secret white nationalists. That's why we promote Mumia Abu-Jamal. That's why we're always championing the civil rights movement and the civil rights Congress, because we're racist. I mean, it's like these people are living in a nutty alternate universe. Nutty alternate universe. I don't know what to say about it. I mean, you know, I mean, it's hilarious. But anyway, that was a whole tangent. Anyway, next question. Post World War II, hope for socialist Japan. The Communist Party was a big party, but the USA was occupying Japan, and the Communist Party had been very, very brutally suppressed. I mean, it had been functioning as an underground illegal organization. The trade union movement in Japan rapidly expanded during the 1950s and 60s, but they were never going to take power. There was never like a revolutionary crisis in Japan. There was something called the Japanese Red Army, which was like an ultra left adventurist group. The Japanese Red Army, they were called, and they would take hostages and blow up buildings and stuff. And it's possible they could have been working for like the CIA or something. I mean, a lot of those groups, like the Red Brigades in Italy, there may have been, it's possible. We know the Red Brigades in Italy, they were called. These were Maoist terrorists in Italy. We know they were working for the CIA, but the CIA was using them to scare Italians out of supporting the Communist Party. They found a bunch of crazy Maoist college kids. These Maoist college kids didn't know. They probably believed what they were doing was right, but they were getting supported to blow shit up and kill people. And then the media would say, see how evil communism is? So is it possible the Japanese Red Army was CIA? I don't know. It's possible. I've never seen any evidence of that. But there was this group called the Japanese Red Army. They called themselves Maoists. They took hostages. They blew up buildings. They were, an ultra left group, kind of like Baader Meinhof in Germany, whatever. But, one of the most wild stories I ever heard about the Japanese Red Army is that they hijacked an airplane. This is wild. They hijacked an airplane and they said, take us to North Korea. And so the pilot's like, okay, I'll take you to North Korea. Landed the plane in South Korea. They landed in South Korea. And he's like, okay, we're in North Korea. And so a couple people came on the plane and they're like, yep, we're in North Korea. Get off the plane, guys. Thinking that they would like arrest them when they got off the plane. And the Japanese Red Army guys said, show us a picture of Kim Il-sung. And they said, we'll go get one. They said, you got 2 seconds. You got 5 minutes to show us a picture of Kim Il-sung. And they're like, oh, shit. Yeah, you got us. It's true. In North Korea, you're always within 5 minutes of a picture of Kim Il-sung. South Korea, it's illegal to display a picture of Kim Il-sung. So, yeah, that was how they said, all right, if we're in North Korea, show us a picture of Kim Il-sung. You've got 5 minutes. And they're like, yeah, we're in South Korea. You got us. So they hijacked the plane again, flew the plane up, and went to North Korea. I think that's a really, really funny story. I don't know if it's true. Someone told me that years ago. It could just be an urban legend. I think it's hilarious, though, that the Japanese Red Army hijacked a plane, said, take us to North Korea, and they tried to trick them and go to South Korea, but they had the answer. They said, show us a picture of Kim Il-sung. Within 5 minutes, couldn't do it, so they were back up in the air and they went to North Korea. I think that's really funny. I do not advocate hijacking planes or left adventurism. Do not misinterpret this story. And I don't even know if this story is true. It could just be a stupid urban legend. I heard it from somebody years ago. The guy's pretty credible. The guy who told me that story, he would know this kind of thing, but could be bullshit. I don't know. It's a funny story. Next question. All right. Your wife says traditional Chinese medicine works. Well, hey, they should look into it. I'm not saying it's necessarily false. A lot of these herbs do have a medical value, right? Acupuncture. I had an aunt when I was a kid. I mean, she's still my aunt. I haven't seen her in a long time. And she does traditional Chinese medicine. And when she was putting needles in me, I'd have like a cramp in my arm and she'd put needles in me. I felt something. So I'm not discrediting it. I just, it was generally the way it was developed was with religion. Mao got rid of the religion that goes along with it. But, I mean, does it have scientific value? Who am I to say, right? I mean, I think, those kids in those films, the Mao cures deaf mutes, they could really hear somebody cured their muteness, so there you go. All right. And the last question, Party of Communists. I know a lot of great people in that group, right? Chris Haloli, who was their candidate in Vermont for Congress, awesome. And, a lot of the people that work with CPI, they were in the group. There's CPI members that are in it. I am not going to join the Party of Communists, but there's good people in the group. They seem good. And the thing is, CPI is not a party. I love George Galloway. He's awesome. But when he introduced me on his show, he said that I was trying to form a party. And I'm not going to correct him on TV. I'm not going to do that. But he said he's trying to form a party. Not true. Not trying to form a party. I'm a think tank. A party will eventually emerge. And I hope that my efforts in CPI, our educational work, will have something to do with building that party. But right now, CPI is an educational think tank. You can be in the Communist Party and be in CPI, and there are some members. They're brave. I don't know how they make it. There are some CPI members in the Communist Party. I don't know how they get away with it. I don't know how they don't get expelled. I'm blown away by their bravery because the Communist Party is having their... But there's members. There's Party of Communist members in CPI. There are PSL members in CPI. Again, brave, but hey, that's fine. There are people in Maoist groups in CPI. We don't have any trots yet, but we would allow them. We're not a party. We're a think tank. And as long as you agree with what we're about and you'll help us do the work of building CPI and you'll pay your dues on time, you can join. That's how we work. And we allow people who are against gay marriage, people who are against abortion. The majority are for gay marriage and for abortion, but there's some who aren't. And we are about getting out of the movement to the masses. That's what we're about. So there you go. All right, folks, it's been fun. It's been awesome. And now we are going to end the stream. New upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. All right, folks.